The 18th Dynasty, the famous Pharaohs. If you have been following the history of this proud civilization ever since the unification of the land under Narmer, or Menes in some texts, then you can truly appreciate how far we are now from the genesis of Egypt's timeline. As we explore further, we ask that you once again step into this foreign and mystical land of a bygone era. Forget modernity for a while. Let the room you are in fade into the background and stand with us now at the door of a new dynasty, the 18th dynasty at the beginning of the New Kingdom. The year is 1570 BCE, and Egypt has just emerged from the horrors and chaos of the Second Intermediate Period. Once the Hyksos were expelled, the country was filled with celebration. There is no longer any chaos or senseless slaughter of the people. Not to mention, literacy and bureaucracy finally caught up with the modern Egyptians. More and more citizens have learned how to read, write, and send letters in and outside the country. Even diplomatic and trade relations with foreign powers have significantly increased. The people might not have known it then, but the 18th dynasty was exciting. Before them lay the foundations of a new kingdom, aptly named the New Kingdom. This was to be a time of immense wealth and influence, a period that would invigorate the nation and inspire admiration and emulation across the globe. As scholars of the land, we are excited to learn more about this pivotal era's impact. Please read through the history of the 18th dynasty with us and learn more about its contribution to our modern-day understanding of the land. An introduction to the 18th dynasty. When we think about ancient Egypt in the context of books and movies, the depiction stems more often than not from the 18th dynasty onward. This was when the famed pharaohs such as Hatshepsut, Ramesses, and Amenhotep reigned. Interestingly enough, it was also a time when the word pharaoh gained more acceptance. Before such time, monarchs were referred to as kings, and the pharaoh was a term that referred to the king's residence, directly translated as Great House. The Middle Kingdom, which started in the 18th dynasty, is one of the most documented periods in Egyptian history. This is due to the 18th dynasty's celebration of literacy and the novelty of writing. Egyptians wanted to explore this new communication system by writing and recording prolifically. Thus, this is the 18th dynasty, an exciting time in Egyptian history. Scholars have referred to it as a dynasty that exalted Egypt to such a height of power and wealth. The New World Order was afoot following the disunification of the state under the Hyksos rule. With the expulsion of the nightmare and a clear view of the war's spoils, the people felt a renewed sense of optimism. Egypt is finally united once again, and the borders are being rebuilt. As one might imagine, life in the aftermath of the Hyksos era was defined by both relief and anticipation. However, the Egyptian people still faced significant challenges. War did not show mercy to anyone, including its victor. Egypt's arid land magnified the long-standing issue of famine. The once carefully tilled lands at the Nile bank have dried up. It is more important than ever for the Egyptians to work to rebuild the land and regain its glory. The labor and toil that followed the land's unification ushered in the 18th dynasty. Nevertheless, the people still held hope for the monarchy, which eventually translated to the founding of the New Kingdom's era. The birth of the 18th dynasty. By now, we have traced the beginning of the 18th dynasty to the Hyksos' expulsion from the land. However, to better understand the time that followed, we need to know what happened during the war. For this, we revisit the 13th dynasty. Throughout history, Egypt has experienced consistent waves of strife, peace, strife, and so on. The Middle Kingdom marked the 13th dynasty as an era of peace. Unity and proof were the land's main themes, but the 13th dynasty ended this. At this time, Semitic people called the Hyksos took residence in Lower Egypt. In Upper Egypt, the Kingdom of Kush was also formed. These settlements would not have been able to slither their way inside Egypt if not for the monarchy's neglect during the tail end of the 13th dynasty. These superpowers that resided in the land ushered in a new era, the Second Intermediate Period. Despite the unwelcome arrival, Egyptians and northern and southern settlers were not enemies beforehand. War only broke out when King Apepi of the Hyksos sent a message to the Egyptian king Seqenra-Ptah, which the latter took as a challenge. In this seemingly trivial miscommunication, a war plunged the land into chaos. They took lives, pillaged towns, and left the land in a state of disarray. A few dynasties passed before the Egyptians tasted freedom once again. The hero who broke through the Hyksos stronghold was Ahmose the first king of the 18th dynasty. Under his leadership, the nation regained its unity, and the new kingdom emerged. Although we have demonized the Hyksos so far, they have not precisely been bad tenants of the land. For one, they introduced faster travel to the Egyptians via chariots and horses. They also taught their landlords how to produce bronze. They might have entirely and successfully assimilated into the land, if not for that miscommunication. If this aspect of history wasn't completed, Egypt might be different. Some scholars believe the Hyksos expulsion inspired the Bible's book of Exodus. Learning about the events that might have been interspersed in the Bible's accounts is truly interesting. If this is one of them, and you have read the passages that transpired in the book of Exodus, you might find more familiarity with the 18th dynasty than you had initially thought. Life in the 18th dynasty. Egyptians' quality of life in the 18th dynasty was mostly influenced by the deeds and activities completed in Ahmose. During his reign, not only did he drive off the Hyksos and regain Egyptian land, but he also made sure to build buffer zones in the country's borders. During these campaigns, he secured the country and set the stage for the following economic and political successes. So yes, compared to the other dynasties in Egypt's history timeline, the 18th dynasty was not such a terrible time. Despite struggling to gain a foothold in their new standard, the people enjoyed their newly acquired freedom and peace. They were free to till the lands that had been destroyed by military events before this time. Not to mention, the government was regaining power and wealth, which meant that they were revisiting old laws and exploring reforms that would benefit the people. In any case, the bureaucracy in the Middle Kingdom was not significantly different from its counterpart. At this time, the vizier maintained his power as the pharaoh's principal advisor and the land's chief judge. Although in the beginning the appointment of the vizier was mostly dependent on inheritance, eventually, toward the latter end of the dynasty, the position became more of a badge of honor given to someone who had shown military prowess, loyalty to the pharaoh and the kingdom, and education. Of course, another essential facet of ancient Egyptian life was architecture. As the world became more aware of a burgeoning power in the Mediterranean, the architecture of the pyramids in Saqqara and other areas became objects of marvel. In the 18th dynasty, the pharaohs continued this tradition by concentrating their efforts on building temples, schools, and funerary complexes to house their remains for eternity. Regarding scholarly activities, the 18th dynasty priests, priestesses, noblemen, and everyone educated in writing began to adopt the distinctly Egyptian phenomenon called archaism. In this tradition, the pyramid texts and other forms of archiving were practiced mainly in the land. It is even argued that although archaism reached its peak in the late 26th dynasty, the 18th dynasty scholars were able to contribute significantly to this cultural revolution. During this time, some hieratic characters were also created. The 15 pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. Passed down by Ahmose I's brother from the 17th dynasty, the power fell on Ahmose I as he and his line gave Egypt international distinction. The period was to start with him, down to the Amarna period's kings, and on to the last king of the dynasty, Horemheb. Despite some challenges, The throne succession during this period was thoroughly documented. This high-powered dynasty's 15 kings query and learn about their contributions to Egypt's ancient civilization. Ahmose I. We begin with Ahmose I, who had been Egypt's savior from the clutches of the Hyksos. In some texts, his brother or father had ruled before him, but he was the last of his dynasty of kings. Although he is best known for Egypt's reunification, Ahmose contributed much more during his reign. At the end of his time on the throne, he had left Egypt much more stable, unified, peaceful, and prosperous. Nevertheless, how exactly did this esteemed pharaoh regain Egyptian territory from the settlers in the upper and lower parts of Egypt? It all began in his 10th regnal year. He was born in a time of continuous tug-of-war between the natives of Egypt and the Hyksos, but he was to put an end to it eventually. With his military prowess, he ran a campaign that had resulted in the collapse of Hyksos's stronghold in Avaris. With the fall of this fortress in the eastern delta of the Nile, he successfully managed to drive off the Hyksos. Of course, his military exploits may have been more than just this bland retelling, but we'll let you fill in the gaps of his conquests. Besides defeating Hyksos, Ahmose's first success was creating the military class. As a reward for the loyalty and bravery of the soldiers who had accompanied him in his campaign, he handsomely rewarded them with spoils and personal enslaved people from the war captives. To ensure that Egypt would not have to suffer the same threat again, he also created a new office to protect the borders of the land. His heavily militaristic background resulted in him appointing power to his military officers. During his time, he closely linked military successes to political victories. He carefully chose his officials based on their valor and performance in Egypt's military campaigns. Amenhotep I. When Ahmose died, he was succeeded by his son, Amenhotep I. Thanks to his father's efforts, Amenhotep inherited a throne and a nation that was economically sound and prosperous. However, as his father was, Amenhotep I was concerned about solidifying the monarchy's claim to the land of Egypt and the areas surrounding its borders. On top of his military expeditions, he also re-established the trading relations the country once enjoyed with neighboring Asiatic countries. Like his predecessors, he continued the campaign to expand the nation in Syria. We know of some of his conquests through the accounts written by his soldiers during his reign. In terms of religious activities, Amenhotep continued to celebrate the state god Amun-Re. The cult of the state god in particular had grown its treasury through donations and offerings derived from the spoils of war. Through this wealth, monuments honoring the cult were built in Thebes. His mortuary complex redesign was one of Amenhotep's most notable architectural achievements. Instead of building it in the usual pyramid form, he had his tomb made in a rock-cut form. Consequently, upon his death, people deified him as the god responsible for decorating royal tombs. He will be remembered and revered throughout Egypt's religious consciousness as the god of the artisans of Deir el-Medina. Thutmose I, the third pharaoh of the dynasty, was born with the name Thoth, but was later renamed King Thutmose. It is speculated that Amenhotep may have been his father through Senseneb. Much like the kings before him, he had immediately sought to fortify Egypt's borders and push it further to expand the nation's reach. However, his reign was not as peaceful as those of Ahmose I and Amenhotep I. Just after his coronation as the new pharaoh, a rebellion in Nubia erupted. The new king rode to the region to ensure the success of his people. Ultimately, he emerged victorious, even receiving credit for the Nubian king's demise. Of course, that was not the last of his military campaigns. Immediately after, he also led a campaign against Nubia to have a canal freely built for his merchants' comfortable travel. In his fourth year, another military threat arose in Nubia. However, much like the campaigns he had led in the prior years, he had managed to stamp down the rebellion. Of course, another metric for Pharaoh's success was the architectural projects they initiated. In particular, Thutmose I laid the foundation for the Temple of Karnak with the help of Inini, his architect. He also built the Ennead, which was found in Abydos. He was buried in the now famous Valley of the Kings when he died. Ineni, his vizier and architect, dug his tomb and built his mortuary complex. Thutmose II. After his father's death, Thutmose II took on the responsibility of the throne. He was married to the prominent Hatshepsut, his half-sister. Some texts speculate that Thutmose had merely been a puppet pharaoh. The real power governed in the 13 years of his reign was allegedly Hatshepsut. As was starting to become a practice during the 18th dynasty, a rebellion led by the Kush started just as Thutmose II was coronated. This occurred despite Thutmose I's attempts at vanquishing the Nubian rebellion in the land. In the previous reigns, the pharaohs had volunteered to ride into battle themselves to subjugate whatever rebellion there was. Thutmose II, however, broke tradition and instead sent out forces of the Egyptian Empire to battle. The empire triumphed over this revolt through his father's military general's competence. His participation in the Exodus may explain this young pharaoh's fame. It is speculated that he had been the pharaoh mentioned in the Old Testament because of his parentage and lineage circumstances. When he passed away, they buried him in Deir el-Bahri. The discovery of his mummy also took place here. Further investigation of his body revealed a rather difficult life. Although his body had been hacked to pieces in the post-mortem, it has been established that he died at a young age from a debilitating disease that had left scars all over his body. He died frail and sick at around the age of 30. Hatshepsut. Moreover, now we meet the fifth leader of the 18th dynasty, Queen Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut is the second confirmed pharaoh of ancient civilization in the long line of Egyptian monarchs. However, even before she was crowned as the head of the empire, it had long been speculated that the queen was the brains behind Thutmose II's reign. Of course, her rise to power had not been without strife. The royal advisors had not been particularly keen on surrendering the power to a woman, so Hatshepsut had to use her connections, lineage, education, and sheer wit to win over the court. Through a wise manipulation of her knowledge of religion, she had decreed herself as the wife of the god Amun. She also acted as a co-regent for her son, Thutmose III. Scholars have established that Hatshepsut's reign lasted for 21 years, longer than any other queen in the long line of Egypt's monarchs. During her time on the throne, she managed to fortify trading relations with foreign countries, leading to a significant increase in the royal treasury. She also initiated hundreds of construction projects all across Egypt. Her reign was the most prolific in building grand and robust architectural marvels. A few of her projects include Karnak's Red Chapel and the Temple of Pakhet. Like the kings before her, she was buried in Deir el-Bahri when she died. Senenmut built and decorated her complex at the Valley of the King's Entrance. Regarding size, her tomb served as the standard for the complexes built in the area, Thutmose III. By the time Thutmose III was crowned the new pharaoh, archaism had taken on new heights, and his reign had been very much documented. In the archives, his reign was said to have lasted over 54 years, with his time in power ending at 56 years old. However, he did not spend all those years in complete autonomy over the throne and Egypt's vast empire. In the first 22 years, he acted as a co-regent to his stepmother Hatshepsut. Thutmose III gained widespread recognition for his military campaigns and earned the title of a tactical genius. So, it does not come as a surprise that there has been a total of 17 campaigns credited to his name. Most of these campaigns were in pursuit of expanding the empire. Thus, by the end of its reign, Egypt had amassed an impressive wealth of land, the biggest it had ever seen. Over 20 years, Egypt had conquered 350 cities, a prolific feat likely driven by his passion for leading these expeditions. In keeping with the archivist era, the accounts of all of his military activities, whether wins or failures, have been transcribed in the walls of the Temple of Amun found in Karnak. All of these share his tours in Syria, Canaan, and other neighboring lands. Nevertheless, Thutmose was not just a military genius. He was also an inventive builder. During his reign, he initiated the construction of over 50 temples. He was a man of both military prowess and artistic sensibilities. Under his power, the cultural lives of Egyptians thrived. He even introduced new brands of architecture and art. Just a month before his 54th year on the throne, the enterprising pharaoh died and was buried just above the mortuary of Hatshepsut in Deir el-Bahri. His mummy was to be discovered centuries later and unwrapped by either Emile Brugsch or Gaston Maspero, Amenhotep Masodik. After Thutmose III's long and prosperous reign, his son Amenhotep II ascended to the throne at 18. As a young pharaoh, he learned the art of combat, military tactics, and other sports that the youth used to occupy their time with. Amenhotep conducted fewer military expeditions than his father. Moreover, the ones he did launch often emerged as the victor. He was known for his physical prowess, after all, and he fully utilized it in the face of battle. In his 7th year as pharaoh, a rebellion occurred despite his reputation for using his strength to defeat his enemies. The archives recorded that he had again trampled his enemies, but the scribes may have favored their king. In the area of construction, Amenhotep II spent most of his time initiating projects in Karnak. Most of his projects aimed to enhance the condition of the smaller temples constructed during his father's reign. Naturally, he started a few printings, including Amanda's renowned temple. Amenhotep II was buried in a mortuary complex at the time of his death at the far end of the Theban necropolis. Scholars have yet to establish his cause of death. Thutmose IV. The 8th pharaoh is a speculated usurper to the throne, as he was not meant to have been the crowned prince. Despite his somewhat rocky start and comparatively short term, he was known for initiating the Sphinx restoration at Giza. He also commissioned the Dream Stele, which was alleged propaganda in his favor. Again, despite its somewhat shady nature, it has given scholars a glimpse into the, if not a bit colored, life of the Sphinx. The Sphinx carved this text into a stone tablet and placed it in its paws. People say that he did all this to convince them of his legitimacy to the throne. Besides these two undertakings, little is known about the pharaoh's reign. A few rebellion uprisings had taken place, but these were minor enough to only warrant a footnote in Egypt's history at the time of Thutmose IV. Of course, like every other king and queen in the 18th dynasty, Thutmose IV prioritized the construction of temples and his mortuary complex. He completed the tallest obelisk at the Temple of Karnak during his time. He was buried in the King's Valley when he died, but was later moved to another tomb. Amenhotep III. The 9th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty was known as Amenhotep the Magnificent. The next millennia will reveal that he had the most surviving statues of all Egyptian pharaohs. Researchers have identified 250 of his statues in all corners of Egypt. People claim that Amenhotep received his crown at 6 to 12. If this is true, he would have ruled with a regent in the first few years of his reign. His reign had been incredibly peaceful and uneventful, a much-needed refrain for the Egyptians after years of war and strife with their neighbors. Scholars believe that Amenhotep III elected his son Akhenaten as a co-regent to the throne in the last years of his reign. If accurate, their reign together could not have lasted more than a year or two, as Amenhotep III met his demise shortly after. Amenhotep III died of sickness and maladies, and was buried in the King's Valley in the western region of the land. Akhenaten. Amenhotep's son Akhenaten followed next. He ruled for over 17 years and was best known for reforming the land's traditional polytheism. If you followed their history, you would know that 15th Dynasty kings tried this. He transferred the state's religious worship to Aten from the worship of Amun. In this endeavor, he even left the priests of the cult of Amun bereft of any resources. Of course, expecting people to abruptly change their beliefs was unrealistic. Most of Akhenaten's religious reforms were not readily accepted by the people of the land. His unpopularity in Egypt was so strong that the archives eventually erased him. Little details about him called him an enemy and a criminal. Without discovering his Aten-honoring city in Amarna, this strong-willed pharaoh would have been forgotten. Akhenaten eventually died of a strange illness, which scholars speculate was a genetic abnormality, and his reign, which had caused much debate and havoc, finally ended. Saqqara. The monarch who followed Akhenaten was not established as a king or queen, but he or she went by the name of Saqqara. As one who had ruled in the Amarna period, their accounts were erased by a later king called Horemheb, so there is not much text or cultural evidence to go by. There is little evidence in the Merir tomb, where some of the depictions about Saqqara were established, indicating that they were rulers of Egypt during the time of the Amarna kings. Their reign, however, was brief, at a maximum of 3 years. When he or she died, Saqqara was buried with the rest of the monarchs in the Valley of Kings, or at least he or she is presumed to have been. We have yet to discover his mummy and tomb, which we hope will shed more light on the life of this past head of state. Neferuaten. The throne fell to another woman later in the Amarna period. Some speculated that Queen Neferuaten was the more famous Nefertiti. If so, this monarch would be the last monarch of the Amarna period within the 18th dynasty. Many theories exist regarding Neferuaten's parentage, reign, and persona. However, inscriptions regarding this monarch have recently been discovered, and it is now verified that they were the head of the state at the regnal year 16. What is curious is that most of Tutankhamun's funerary goods were found to have been derived from Neferuaten's belongings. This leads many scholars to believe that they might have been buried without royal distinctions or robbed of their royauthite, or they had been buried. Tutankhamun. Neferuaten's successor is the more famous Tutankhamun, the last of his family to rule over Egypt. A thorough study will reveal that his father was the pharaoh Akhenaten. Tutankhamun is famed throughout history as the young pharaoh crowned when he was 8. One of Tutankhamun's significant contributions to the Egyptian timeline is that he restored the religion that the Amarna period kings had tried to erase. Under his reign, monuments to Amun were restored, and priests of the same god cult were again empowered. Despite accounts that mention his frail disposition, Tutankhamun had been an energetic and sporty king. He spent most of his time training for archery and other sports despite his physical disabilities. The 18th dynasty ended when Tutankhamun died. The treasures discovered in his tomb would eventually bring him global recognition. Avenue. Despite his brief stint on the throne, I was known for being the penultimate pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. It is theorized that he had been the brains behind the reign of the young king Tutankhamun. Thus, when the latter died, he took control of one of the ancient world's most influential civilizations. As the vizier to the young king Tutankhamun, I carried out the reforms many speculated were his original ideas. He sought to restore the old religious ways. He had made arrangements for succession before he died, appointing Nachtmen to succeed him. However, because of some speculations about this plan, Horemheb rose to power as the last king of the 18th dynasty. Horemheb. Now we finally reach the last king of the 18th dynasty. Horemheb ruled for 14 years despite having no familial relations with the royal family that reigned in Egypt throughout the 18th dynasty. Previously a commander-in-chief of the Egyptian army in I and Tutankhamun's time, he ascended to and ruthlessly erased all evidence of the reign of the kings of the Amarna period. His motives had been clear-cut: to restore Egypt to its full glory and redo all possible damages that the Amarna period had done. Monuments were demolished, temples of the god Amun were rebuilt, and his predecessor's archives were erased. He died without a son, and with him, the 18th dynasty ended. The end of the 18th dynasty. Despite the archivist's spike in the 18th dynasty, Horemheb still managed to edit out a significant period in the 18th dynasty's timeline. The only surviving texts were those of Manetho, so his works are treated as one of the Egyptologist's significant resources today. The 19th dynasty. The Golden Age. Egypt is a narrow strip of fertile land hugging the river Nile, which winds through the constantly shifting sands of the unforgiving desert. It is one of the most fascinating countries you could ever visit, and it was once the richest and most powerful land in the world. Pharaohs and queens once ruled this land for nearly 3 millennia, leaving priceless treasures, stories on stone, gold, and papyri. Furthermore, these wondrous millennia were ruled by dynasties, lines of rulers, some of whom raised their land to the skies, and others brought their kingdom to its knees. Among these dynasties were the Pharaohs, who created an empire and ushered in ancient Egypt's golden age, the New Kingdom of Egypt. The kings and queens of this age ruled Egypt from the 16th century BC to the 11th century BC, 1,000 years after the Great Pyramid builders. During that time, they created a land that was the greatest in the ancient world, the first empire in recorded history. The 19th dynasty of the New Kingdom, circa 1292 BC, 1189 BC. Much of its information has survived since the New Kingdom was the most documented period in ancient Egypt. Furthermore, those writings tell us that this period was characterized by strength, unity, riches, power, and plenty. An interesting point to note is that it was only in the New Kingdom that Egypt's kings came to be known as pharaohs. Before the ascension of these great monarchs, the rulers of Egypt were known as kings. Pharaoh means great house, the Greek derivation of the Egyptian word for the royal residence, per-a. Nevertheless, this age's influence is so strong that modern-day historians refer to all the kings of ancient Egypt as pharaohs. The beginning of the greatest period of ancient Egypt, the 19th dynasty. The last part of the 18th dynasty was filled with turmoil caused by the sinful actions of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who tried to remake Egyptian society by force. Horemheb, the last ruler of the 18th dynasty, was not of royal blood and took the throne after the last of Pharaoh Amosewarn's line, the boy king Tutankhamun, died with no heir. Furthermore, since Horemheb had no surviving children to inherit his throne, he passed the mantle of kingship onto his trusted vizier, Parames. Parames then took on Rameses I when he ascended the throne, thus establishing the 19th dynasty of Egypt. While Rameses I ruled for just a few years, his son and grandson, Seti I and Rameses II, steered the kingdom to glorious heights of prosperity and development. Thanks to their military campaigns, diplomatic policies, and foreign trade, the early kings of the 19th dynasty made Egypt an empire, the most prosperous in the world. Money was poured into the empire, and the pharaohs used this to develop their kingdom further. While much of that money went into giving thanks to Egypt's gods, innovations were seen in all aspects of Egyptian life. During this period, the kings strategically used the power of information to disseminate news throughout the kingdom and legitimize their rule over the land. Rameses II was a master at using information to promote himself and his successes. Architectural innovations were the most marked change during this dynasty. The pharaohs of Egypt replaced the pyramids with tombs, creating the Valley of the Kings as their burial site. The queens of Egypt were buried in the Valley of the Queens complex. This was the Temple Age, and many of the remaining structures are a testament to the architect's creativity. As a result of the building projects, the arts also flourished. Exquisite paintings adorned the walls of temples and tombs of the New Kingdom. Furthermore, Seti I and Rameses II were the most excellent promoters of these works. Furthermore, because the kingdom was once again united, the Egyptians regained complete control of the Nile River, the kingdom's lifeblood and economy. Farmers could get the water they needed for their fields, and the river provided the fish needed for sustenance and papyrus reeds for paper. It was also the main transportation route for the kingdom, with messages and goods speedily reaching their destinations. The one key thing that the early kings of the 19th dynasty did was strengthen the traditional worship of Amun-Re, the sun god of Egypt. They wanted to repair the damage done by King Akhenaten in the 18th dynasty when he tried to introduce monotheism and worship a single god, Aten. It was a golden time for the kingdom, with the king's central authority and the bureaucrats keeping law and order healthy. Mentuhotep Rameses I, the vizier who became pharaoh. Circa 1292 BC, circa 1290 BC. The man who would become the first king of the 19th dynasty was born to a non-royal military family. His home was near Avaris in the rich Nile Delta, and he grew up during the time of Akhenaten, the pharaoh of the 18th dynasty who turned Egypt upside down and brought the kingdom to the brink of destruction. Paramesse, also Paramesu, was the name given to him by his parents. His father, Seti, was a troop commander. So it was only natural that he would follow in his father's footsteps and join the military. Paramesse, a remarkable man, quickly ascended through the ranks, surpassing his father through his hard work and talent. He lived through the turmoil that marked the end of the 18th dynasty and worked with Horemheb, the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, to repair the damage done by the Amarna kings of that period. During his illustrious career, Paramesse held numerous essential posts. He was the commander of the fortress of Sile, master of horses, colonel, royal scribe, charioteer of His Majesty, controller of the Nile mouth, king's envoy to every foreign land, and general of the Lord of the Two Lands. Paramesse and Horemheb met and became friends in the Egyptian military. Horemheb trusted this man so much that he made Paramesse his vizier when he became pharaoh. Later, the pharaoh made him competent and finally named him his successor. When he became pharaoh, Paramesse was an older man in his 50s. He was named Rameses, which means Ra, the sun god, fashioned him. His royal name was Mentuhotep, which translates to established by the strength of Ra. He also adopted other names, including his golden Horus name, which translates to he who confirms Ma'at throughout the two lands. His choice of names was significant, since it communicated his wish to continue what I and Horemheb, the last two pharaohs of the last dynasty, had done: remove all traces of the damage the heretical Akhenaten had done to their kingdom. Rameses I ruled only for about 2 years. Scholars do not have an exact date of his rulership, but he did a lot in that time. He first secured the succession. He appointed his only child, Seti, crown prince, making him competent and securing his dynasty. Then, he strengthened the Nubian garrison to the south in Buhan to prevent incursions from that region. He is also believed to have led a military expedition into the Western Asian region, but it is unclear whether he led more expeditions. At the Temple of Amun at Karnak in Thebes, Rameses I had reliefs sculpted onto the second pylon, completing his friend and predecessor's work, Horemheb, which had started. He also began the construction of a temple and chapel at Abydos in the north. Furthermore, the king reopened the kingdom's turquoise mines in the Sinai, even further north. Sadly, he died soon after he ascended to the throne. His death occurred so quickly that the construction of his tomb was hasty and never truly completed. Although Ramesses I ruled for such a short time, he began what today is called the Ramesside era, which lasted until the end of the 20th dynasty. Ramesses has become synonymous with ancient Egypt, with as many as 10 kings adopting the same name, immortalizing this exceptional man for all time. Mentuhotep Seti I, the repeater of births, circa 1290 BC, circa 1279 BC. Seti I was the only son of the previous king, Ramesses I, and his wife Site. His birth name was Seti Merenptah, which means man of Set, beloved of Ptah. Upon his ascension to the Egyptian empire's throne, Seti took the name Menmatre, which means established in the justice of Re. Seti, I was his father's son, and like his father and grandfather before him, he joined the military. Moreover, just like his father, he rose through the ranks and became a powerful man in his own right, earning various titles such as troop commander, head archer, and later vizier. His military conquests did not stop after he ascended to the throne, and he was known to have personally led multiple military expeditions during his reign. Once he became pharaoh, Seti married Tuya, a lieutenant in the military, and had 4 children by her. His eldest son died early, so his second son, Ramesses II, became the crown prince of Egypt. Seti I's reign is considered one of the greatest, especially from the perspective of art and culture. Many scholars feel that Seti I, not his famous son Ramesses II, was the greatest pharaoh in ancient Egypt. Based on historical evidence, most scholars feel that Seti I would have reigned for 15 to 20 years. At that time, Seti intended to re-establish the supremacy of the Egyptian empire, which meant restoring order in his kingdom. Moreover, because of his focus on restoring tradition and order in Egypt, his people gave Seti I the name Repeater of Births. His building projects, many of which have become the most significant monuments in Egyptian history, showed quality in the relief sculptures and other designs that later kings have never matched. At Karnak, at the Temple of Amun, he began constructing the hypostyle hall, which his son and successor, Ramesses II, finally completed. Seti I constructed the hall, inscriptions and reliefs on its northern wing. However, he could not complete his project, so Ramesses II completed the southern wing of the complex. He also constructed a stunning limestone temple at Abydos and adorned its interiors with incomparably beautiful relief scenes. This temple, now called the Temple of Seti I, is considered one of the most remarkable temples ever built in ancient Egypt. The most exciting part about this temple is its Hall of Records, also called the Gallery of Lists. In this hall is the list of all the pharaohs who ruled Egypt from the earliest times. However, we have not listed the names of the Amarna pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. So, the list jumps directly from Amenhotep III to Horemheb. Today, that list is known as the Abydos King List. He could not complete this temple, but his son Ramesses II completed it after his death. Behind his temple at Abydos, Seti I built yet another unique structure, an underground temple called the Osirion. The Osirion was built to illustrate how life was created from primeval waters. Furthermore, when Seti I died, his body was laid here before being taken to his final resting place in the Valley of the Kings. Seti I also built a small, beautiful temple dedicated to his father, Ramesses I, in Abydos, a mortuary temple for himself at Thebes, and his grandest creation, his tomb in the King's Valley. Seti also undertook restoration projects to repair the reliefs defaced by Akhenaten and complete buildings left unfinished by previous rulers. The restorations and new constructions were part of his effort to restore order and tradition to his kingdom. Seti III also had to reclaim territory lost to foreign powers during the time of the Amarna rulers. Moreover, his military experience proved beneficial in this situation. Seti I spent the first 10 years of his reign on the battlefield, fighting wars in Nubia, Libya, and Asia. The Hittites had become a significant threat to Egyptian domination in the Near East, and Seti and his troops fought them off many times, keeping them from usurping Egyptian territories in Syria and Canaan. Moreover, while he could not completely eradicate the threat from the Hittites, Seti was able to reconquer most of the territories lost by the Amarna period's rulers. Seti's most significant military achievement was capturing the Syrian city of Kadesh. He wrested control of that town and the neighboring territory of Amurru from the Hittites. However, he could not hold on to the two territories for long. Rameses II tried to reclaim this territory but failed, and from then on, Kadesh and Amurru came under Hittite rule. After examining his mummy, I found that the pharaoh appeared less than 40 years old when he died. While it is clear that Seti did not die violently, it is not clear what caused his death. Some have suggested that Seti I's sudden and unexpected death was due to heart problems. Seti I may not have lived long, but he achieved much in the time he spent asking. Userkaf Rameses II, the Great Ancestor, circa 1279 BC, circa 1213. The third ruler of the 19th dynasty, Rameses II, is known as the greatest and most potent of all the pharaohs in ancient Egypt. He was called the Great Ancestor by all succeeding kings and even the people of Egypt. The ancient Greeks referred to Rameses II as Ozymandias. This name was derived from the first part of his royal name, Uderma-Atresetepnre, which means the Ma'at of Ra is powerful, chosen of Ra. Rameses II is also called Rameses the Great. Like his forefathers, Rameses II served in the army and earned the title of captain. At 14, the army named him Prince Regent and assigned him to his household. He experienced his first battle soon after. By the time he was 22, Rameses II lived a very long life, unlike his father, even by today's standards. He lived until 90 or 91, though some scholars say he lived to 96. By the end of his life, this pharaoh had had more than 200 wives and concubines and more than 100 sons and daughters. He outlived most of them, including his beloved wife, Queen Nefertari, his companion. His reign was so long that most of his subjects had never known another king. When he died, there was a tremendous amount of panic in the kingdom, and many believed that the end of the world had come. While most scholars focus on the Battle of Kadesh against the powerful Hittites, Rameses II fought many campaigns, such as the battle against the Shurden pirates that created chaos along Egypt's Mediterranean coast. In this battle, the king showed great strategic skill by creating a trap for these pirates, leading to a great victory. Interestingly, he did not kill the Shurden pirates. Instead, he pressed them into military service in the Egyptian army and used many of them as his elite bodyguards. Rameses also battled and won against the Syrians and the Canaanites in the 4th year of his reign as pharaoh. He carried out this expedition to subdue local insurrections and ensure a secure base for further expansions. After his resounding victory against the pirates and the Canaanites, Rameses started constructing his capital city, Per-Rameses, which means House of Rameses. This new capital was located near the older city of Avaris in the eastern delta region of Egypt. Per-Rameses, it was a city that rivaled Thebes in beauty. However, do not think this beautiful city was just a pleasure center. Rameses II had chosen this location for a more important reason. Its location became the base from which he could launch his military campaigns. These wars in the Near East led to the historic Battle of Kadesh. While he did not win the battle, he did not lose it either. What was remarkable about it was that it led to the signing of the first ever peace treaty. His building projects are legendary, even today. They are a testament to his nation's sheer wealth, since he was the most prolific builder of all pharaohs of ancient Egypt. He completed the great hypostyle hall at the Temple of Karnak, one of the most magnificent complexes ever built. He then went on to his father's temple in Abydos. He also completed Seti's funerary temple at Luxor and built his own at Ramesseum. He carved a massive 57-foot statue of a seated Rameses in this temple, another testament to his glory. Rameses II built 6 temples in Nubia, one of which is Abu Simbel, one of the most magnificent monuments ever built. He even built a smaller temple for his favorite wife, Queen Nefertari. Rameses II's influence on Egypt is undeniable. He ensured it. We found the most famous of his statues near Memphis. It was colossal, weighing 83 tons, the largest statue ever made of an Egyptian king. From his mummy examinations, scientists discovered that Rameses was a redhead with fair skin and an aquiline nose. In ancient Egypt, those with red hair were considered Set, the killer of Osiris, and one of the most powerful gods in their pantheon. Rameses's reign was one of unsurpassed prosperity and power for Egypt. After his death, the kingdom slowly but surely began its decline. Merneptah, the last great king of the 19th dynasty, circa 1213 BC, circa 1203 BC. Merneptah, also spelled Meremptah and Meneptah, was the 13th son of Rameses II. He was almost 60 years old when he ascended Egypt's throne. He came to power only because all his older brothers had already died. Meneptah is believed to have been the 4th child of Rameses II's second queen, Isetnofret I. He married Isetnofret II, who was, in all probability, his sister, which is why she bore his mother's name. However, another of his queens, Takhat, was the mother of his successor, Seti II. Queen Takhat was also considered Price-Meremptah and probably the mother of the usurper Amenemhat and Queen Tusret. Queen Tusret later became the wife of Seti II and then ruled as Queen of Egypt. Before he became pharaoh, Merneptah was a powerful official in his father's government. In the 40th year of Ramesses' reign, Merneptah was appointed overseer of the army. After 15 years, in the 55th year of Ramesses' reign, his 13th son was proclaimed the heir to the throne and given the crown prince's official title. By this time, Rameses II was already 80, so Merneptah shouldered most administrative responsibilities and acted as prince regent for the last decade or so of his elderly, and some believe senile, father's life. After becoming king, Merneptah took the royal name Ba-en-Re-Meri Nether, which translates to the soul of Ra, beloved of the gods. Merneptah did not build many monuments like his father. However, there is enough information about him to know that he carried out multiple military campaigns during his 10-year rule. By the end of Rameses II's reign, Egypt's military preparedness was not what it used to be. So, when Merneptah finally ascended to the throne, he had to suppress many rebellions and uprisings. The biggest challenge to Merneptah came from the west, from the Libyans. Emboldened by the death of Rameses the Great, the Libyans began to encroach into Egyptian territory. The Libyans joined hands with the Sea Peoples to attack Heliopolis and Memphis's northern cities, the administrative and religious centers of northern Egypt. Despite his advanced age, Merneptah mobilized his forces and rose to meet his enemies. The pharaoh's strategic thinking led to Egypt's great victory, routing the Libyans and Sea Peoples. Merneptah's victories were carved into stelae, one of which has become particularly important today. For the first time in recorded history, the Israel Stela, as it is known today, mentions the nation of Israel. Merneptah moved Egypt's administrative capital back to Memphis from Per-Rameses during his reign. Once there, he constructed his royal palace next to the Temple of Ptah. Even though Merneptah ruled for such a short period and did not leave behind many monuments as his father did before him, we know from his defense of his kingdom and other diplomatic endeavors that he was equal to his father as a capable king. From his mummy study, we know that Merneptah was almost entirely bald and suffered from atherosclerosis and arthritis, and he resembled his grandfather, Seti I, more than he did his father. Userkaf Seti II, the legitimate successor, circa 1203 BC, circa 1197 BC. From then on, the dynastic rules became short and marred by intrigues and usurpations, signaling the rapid decline of Ramesses II's line. The fifth ruler of the 19th dynasty was Seti II, the son of Merneptah and his great royal wife, Queen Etched II. We lack sufficient information about the dynamics of this once great family's final days, leading to a blurring of family relationships. We know that Seti II was the legitimate heir to the throne and was named Crown Prince. Many of his father's monuments depict him, demonstrating his intended succession to Merneptah's throne. After he ascended to the throne, Seti II's name was Userkaf Setipenre, which means powerful is Ra's manifestations, chosen by Ra. His birth name was Seti Meremptah, meaning one of Set, beloved of Ra. We also know that he was married to Tusret, who later became the last ruler of the 19th dynasty. However, this is where information gets scarce, and scholars have reverted to speculation and possibilities. While this king dealt with many plots against him, his biggest challenge came from Amenemhat, the man who tried to usurp his throne, took control of Thebes, and declared himself king of Upper Egypt. Amenemhat was most probably Seti's half-brother. Scholars initially concluded that Amenemhat had managed to wrest the throne from Seti II, but recent discoveries show that he had only taken control of Thebes and Upper Egypt during the 3rd and 4th years of Seti's reign. Seti continued to maintain control of Lower Egypt in the north. Thus, Seti II and Amenemhat ruled parallelly in Lower and Upper Egypt for 2 or 3 years. According to the available evidence, Seti II regained control of Upper Egypt in the 5th year of his reign and set about eradicating all traces of his adversary. Once he had secured his throne, he expanded the mines at Timnah, which produced copper for the kingdom, where he built a temple dedicated to the goddess Hathor. Seti II also made small additions to the temple of Karnak at Thebes, began work on his tomb, and ordered 2 more tombs to be built in the Valley of Kings, one for his senior queen Tusret and another for his chancellor Bey. The gift of a tomb in the Valley of the Kings to his queen and chancellor was unprecedented, and scholars see this as Seti's way of trying to secure their loyalty. 2 critical papyri date back to Seti II's reign. The first is now presumed to be a satirical commentary on Seti and Amenemhat, a tale called The Two Brothers. The second papyrus is even more critical. It is a record of the trial of a man named Panel. The report accuses Panel, a senior workman from Deir el-Medina, of attempted murder, rape, bribery, tomb robbery, and corruption. This transcript shows the kingdom's crumbling of law and order and central authority erosion. Seti the king never got to complete his tomb, as he died 5 years and 10 months after ascending to Egypt's throne. He left behind very little in terms of a legacy, and with his death, the kingdom descended further into chaos. Mentuhotep Setipenre Amenemhat, the usurper, circa 1201 BC, circa 1198 BC. We know little about Amenemhat, except that he had rebelled against the rightful heir to the throne, Seti II, and taken control of Upper Egypt and Thebes from the 2nd to the 4th years of Seti II's reign. We do not know who Amenemhat was. We know his royal name, the name adopted by a king upon ascension to the throne, was Mentuhotep Setepenre. We also know that his mother's name was Queen Takat. However, we do not know who exactly she was. She may have been either Ramesses II's or Mentuhotep's daughter, or maybe Ramesses II's granddaughter. There is also some debate about whether she was Seti II's wife and whether Seti was Amenemhat's father. However, the most common theory is that Amenemhat was Seti's half-brother. Whatever his relationship with Seti II, Amenemhat ruled for just a couple of years, 4 at the most, before Seti II defeated him, and Egypt was once more united under one ruler. Kenre Merempta Sipta, the Boy King. Circa 1197 BC, circa 1191 BC. Sipta, a boy king similar to Tutankhamun, succeeded Seti II. He was only 10 when he ascended to the throne of the ancient world's greatest empire. Sipta was not the crown prince, so the circumstances that led to his ascension to the throne remain unclear. Sipta was only able to become king with the help of Chancellor Bey. Moreover, we know this because Bey boasted of this achievement in several inscriptions discovered in Aswan and at Gebel el-Silsila. While we know that Sipta was a royal, we do not know his father or mother. Some scholars believe that Sipta was the son of either Seti II or Amenemhat, while others opine that it could even be Merneptah. Many historians feel that Sipta's father was probably Amenemhat because both lived in Chemis when they were young. That theory is further supported by the discovery that Ramesses III, a king of the 20th dynasty, omitted their statues from his procession of ancestral kings in Medinet Habu. Because Amenemhat and Sipta were father and son, scholars believe they usurped the throne. However, other scholars dispute this theory. The fact that Sipta became king without being appointed by his predecessor would make him illegitimate in the eyes of the future kings, so it would be natural that they would omit mention of him. Regardless of his parents, we know he rose to become the penultimate king of the 19th dynasty at a young age. Moreover, he named Queen Tuzret, presumably his stepmother, as his regent, and she ruled the kingdom on his behalf. Sipta ruled for just 5 years and 10 months. We do not know how he died either. Medical examinations of his mummy showed that he was around 16 when he died. He was a tall young man, had reddish-brown hair, and most probably suffered from polio because he had a severely crippled left foot. Site Meriamun, the Queen of Egypt, circa 1191 BC, circa 1189 BC. Tuzret, also known as Trust, was the last ruler of the 19th dynasty and one of the few women who ruled Egypt independently. She claimed to have ruled Egypt for 7 years, but the truth is that for 6 years she ruled as the regent of Sipta, the boy king. Her independent reign lasted 2 years or more, during which she ruled alone. However, some scholars speculate that she may have ruled for 9 years after Sipta's death. When she became the Queen of Egypt, she took the royal name Sait Mariamun, which means daughter of Re, beloved of Amun. Once again, records of this time are few, so we know little about Tuzret. She could have been Merneptah's daughter, and she may have been Amenemhat's sister. Scholars also believe that she was Seti II's second royal wife. We do not know if she ever had any children. After her husband Seti II died, she became regent to Sipta, the boy king. She ruled the land jointly with Chancellor Bey, the man responsible for putting Sipta on the throne. After Sipta's death, the queen took the throne and ruled Egypt as pharaoh. We do not know how Tuzret died. From the elephantine stela of the founder of the 20th dynasty, the Senate, we know that civil war broke out at the end of her reign. However, it remains unclear whether Setnakta ousted her and killed her, or if her death sparked a civil war of succession. After she died, her successor, Setnakta, tried to remove all traces of her rule. Her name was removed from all records, and all the monuments she had built were destroyed. The new king even opened her tomb and replaced all her images with images of himself. Pharaoh Tusret is unique among Egypt's women monarchs because she seized power by force and did not share it with a male partner. The 21st Dynasty. Historians, archaeologists, and scholars still strive to uncover the secrets and stories of ancient times hidden beneath Egypt's shifting sands. They have not been revealed. Treasures that still lie waiting underneath those golden sands and stories that remain untold. Imagine the rich history that hides in these sands. The ancient Egyptian pharaohs dominated the Mediterranean region, building a civilization that spanned almost 30 centuries. During that time, Egypt became known for its technology, science, art, architecture, religious traditions, and rich culture. Only traces of this rich heritage have been uncovered so far. The name of this ancient kingdom is fascinating. Egypt is the name given to this vast kingdom by the ancient Greeks, who called the land Egyptus. The real name of this ancient land is Huatkapta, which translates to mansion of the spirit of Ptah. Ptah was the powerful god of Memphis, the first capital of the Egyptian Empire. Memphis became so famous as a center of religion and trade across all the Mediterranean lands that the kingdom became known as Egypt. However, Egyptians called their kingdom Kemet, which means black land, referring to the dark and rich soil deposited by the Nile River when it floods its banks. In later times, the people of Egypt referred to their land as Misr, which means country. Moreover, to this day, this is how the people of Egypt refer to their country. Now, back to the past. For nearly 3 millennia, Egyptian civilization was ruled by dynasties of kings. The dynasties were a string of rulers with a common origin, usually from the same family. A large part of what we know about ancient Egypt's ruling dynasties comes from Egyptian historian Manetho, who in 300 BC wrote the now lost work Egyptiaca, a history of the royalty of ancient Egypt, in which he chronologically listed the 30 dynasties that ruled the kingdom. Researchers later studied the last 2 dynasties of ancient Egypt, the 31st dynasty and the Ptolemaic dynasty, because they occurred after Manetho's time. These 32 dynasties have been further categorized into either kingdoms or intermediate periods. While not wholly accurate, Manetho's work has proved to be a valuable guide that has supplemented the work of Egyptologists, archaeologists, and other scholars in their quest to uncover the secrets of this fascinating land. Modern-day scholars have used other empirical evidence, such as inscriptions on tombs, papyri that survive to this day, graffiti on the walls of monuments and tombs, inscriptions on various monuments, etc., and pictures of the rulers of this vast and ancient civilization. Traditional scholars have always seen the intermediate dynasties as periods of chaos with no single unifying leader. The view that a single king ruling over the entire land is better than multiple leaders ruling over parts of the kingdom is wrong. Many kings who ruled over Egypt were tyrants who did not consider their people's well-being. For example, the later rulers of the new kingdom allowed the priests of Amun to leech power away, leading to the downfall and dissolution of a unified kingdom and the beginning of the third intermediate period. Traditional Egyptologists also believe that the dissolution of Egyptian culture and society marked the intermediate periods. This is another fallacy because evidence points to the kings of the intermediate period, maintaining the strong culture of the land and ensuring order. A quick overview of the 21st dynasty. The last intermediate period, the third intermediate period, comprises the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, and 26th dynasties. The 21st dynasty, the focus of our story here, lasted 130 years, from 1077 BC to 943 BC. This dynasty was also called the Tannite dynasty because its political capital was in Tanis. Today, all that remains of Tanis is its ruins, but they even testify to the city's grandeur, which became the most important center of trade for Lower Egypt under the rule of the Danites. Sadly, there is not much information about the various pharaohs of Tanis. We know that 6 kings ruled in this dynasty, but we know little more about them. We do not even know where some rulers came from or what they did during their reigns. Scholars, however, assert that this is not due to a lack of record-keeping. Egyptians have been meticulous record-keepers. The reason is much more prosaic. The third intermediate period rulers were based in Tanis, which is located in the center of the Nile Delta, close to the sea. This means the climate was humid and hot. Organic materials such as wood, papyri, and so on would not be able to survive the millennia. Thus, the precious records that would have given us an insight into this period had all decayed and disintegrated before modern historians ever had a chance to examine them. Further down south, where the climate is arid, records were preserved for thousands of years with little deterioration, which is why we know more about the dynasties that ruled when Egypt was united and Thebes was the kingdom's capital. This dynasty was characterized by political division. The north, referred to as Lower Egypt, was controlled by the pharaohs from their capital at Tanis, while the priests of Amun from Thebes controlled Middle and Upper Egypt. Egypt was never unified during the 21st dynasty. The kingdom remained divided between the priests of Amun in the south and the pharaohs in the north. Despite the divide, Egypt was stable, with the rulers of the two regions having close family ties. These ties were so strong that the last ruler of the 21st dynasty was the Theban high priest, Psusennes II. It was under his rule that the land was once more made whole. Our story, however, starts from the beginning of the 21st dynasty, when Hechkepere Setepenre Smendes became its first ruler. Hechkepere Setepenre Smendes, the governor who became king, 1077 BC 1051 BC. Smendes was the governor of Tanis, and he took control of Lower Egypt upon the death of Ramses XI, the last pharaoh of the new kingdom. The last few kings of the new kingdom were weak and allowed the priesthood of Amun to wrest power from their hands. Furthermore, during Ramses XI, the kingdom of Egypt was rife with civil conflict, leading to a land division. The pharaoh's power had weakened, while that of the priests of Amun had strengthened. Eventually, Ramses was forced to share power with the high priest of Amun, Herihor, who took control of Thebes, the traditional center of Egyptian power. Herihor's conquest of Upper and Middle Egypt left Ramses with only Lower Egypt to rule. Furthermore, when he died, the governor of his capital city became the next pharaoh of Lower Egypt and the founder of the 21st dynasty. Smendes was born with the Egyptian name Nesba-Nebjed, which means he of Ram, lord of Mendes. However, Greek scholars translated it to Smendes. We still do not know much about Smendes and his reign, since little about him has survived. We do not know where he was buried, since neither his tomb nor his mummy has ever been discovered. We know that he was buried in Tanis. A piece of funerary equipment belonging to him was discovered there. According to Manetho, Smendes ruled for 26 years, during which time he produced only a small handful of monuments. We know of Smendes from the report of Wenamun, a document that predates his ascension to the throne of Egypt. Wenamun describes Smendes as a powerful general of the north and essential in the delta, as mighty as the high priest of Amun in the south. From the various references to Smendes' reign and the little we know about him, we can assume that he gained the right to rule the throne because his wife, Tentamon, was, scholars believe, related to Ramses' royal house Beans, the ruler of the previous dynasty. While Egypt was divided during Smenda's rule, the kingdom appeared undivided to outsiders because the government became a theocracy, with the ultimate state authority being attributed to the god Amun. Wenamun describes Smendas and Tentamun as the pillars of Amun, that the god had set up for the north of his land. During this period, the mantle of the high priest of Amun became hereditary, passing down from father to son, so the control of Middle and Upper Egypt remained in the hands of the high priests. Interestingly, the successor to Tanis's throne was not Smendas's son, but one of Herihor's sons, Amenemnisu, Neferkare Amenemnisu, the unknown king, 1051 BC 1047 BC. Amenemnisu reigned for just 4 years, and scholars doubted his very existence for centuries. It was not until 1940 that French Egyptologist Pierre Montet discovered Pharaoh Pesusennes's tomb and found Amenemnisu's royal name, Neferkare, inscribed next to his successor Pesusennes I. Amenemnisu's existence was doubted because no artifacts bearing his name were unearthed until Susennes's tomb was discovered. Scholars only referred to this unknown king as Nefercheres in Manetho's epitome. However, Amenemnisu's Horus name, or Egyptian name, was Neferkare Hekawaset. Susennes I. He turned Tanis into a cultural and trade center, 1047 BC 1001 BC. Susennes I, the lord of Tanis, is credited with turning Tanis into Lower Egypt's capital city. During his reign, this little village became a center of culture and trade, making it a point of access to the Nile. Susennes used the enormous blocks of stone salvaged from Per Ramesses' ruins, also called Pi Ramesses. At the turn of the 20th century, Egyptologists mistakenly believed that Ramses II had built Tanis because these stone blocks still bore the name of the builder of Per Ramesses, Ramses II. They even took the obelisks found in Tanis from the ruins of the old city. Only more recent research work proved that these stones had been reused by Susennes I to build Tanis. He constructed the great temple's center and enclosure walls, dedicating them to the gods Amun, Khonsu, and Mut. Susennes is the Greek name of this pharaoh. His original Egyptian name was Pasibkanu, or Pasebakaeniut, which translates to the star appearing in the city. When he ascended the throne, Susennes adopted the name Akepere Selepenamun, which means, "Great are Ra's manifestations, chosen of Amun." There is some confusion about how long Susennes III's reign lasted. Depending on which copy of Manetho's history of the royal dynasties was followed, it lasted 41 or 46 years. Whatever the case, Susennes I's tomb gave scholars deeper insights into the life of the pharaoh in the twilight of the great civilization's history. Discovered in 1940 by Montet, this was the first ever pharaonic tomb found that grave robbers had not previously vandalized. Even the famous Tutankhamun tomb was robbed twice before Western archaeologists discovered it in 1922. When Mentor uncovered Susennes' tomb, it was utterly intact, but sadly, the region's humidity had destroyed the wooden artifacts. Even though all things made of wood inside the tomb had perished, stunning artifacts were found, of which the pharaoh's funerary mask was the most magnificent. People have referred to that mask as one of Tanis's treasured masterpieces. Made from pure gold, with lapis lazuli inlays and black glass for the eyes and eyebrows, it is a stunning art. Susennes' hands and feet were protected by gold stalls, pieces of gold jewelry that protected the fingers and toes, and were also supposed to protect the dead from magical dangers in the afterlife. The finger stalls on the pharaoh's hands are the most intricately crafted pieces ever found, and each stall has perfectly sculpted nails. Each finger of Susennes' mummy was adorned with beautiful gold rings inset with semi-precious stones. gold sandals, delicately molded to the pharaoh's feet, also encased Susenes II's feet, a perfect replica of the leather sandals of the time. In the Third Intermediate Period, it was common to reuse the sarcophagi from older tombs in the Valley of the Kings. This was a state-sanctioned grave robbery. Moreover, Susenes II's outer and middle sarcophagi are a testament to that activity. The outer sarcophagus sports a red cartouche, which tells us that this coffin initially housed the 19th Dynasty's Pharaoh Meremptah, a powerful successor of Ramses II. However, the innermost sarcophagus, made from silver with gold inlay work, was made mostly for Susenes. Silver was more valuable than gold in those days because it was so rare. So an entire sarcophagus made from silver was an accurate statement of grandeur, one that befitted a powerful pharaoh like Susenes I. We also found beautiful necklaces, bracelets, pendants, amulets, and tableware in this pharaoh's tomb. Statues, vases, jars, and other items showed how rich and powerful Susenes I had been. In 1941, doctors examined the mummified body of the pharaoh and determined that Susenes I was an older man. His teeth were worn down, he had numerous cavities, and a terrible abscess had created a hole in his palate. The examination also revealed that Susenes had severe arthritis, and that in all probability he would have been in considerable pain during the last years of his life. Despite his condition in later life, Susenes I did a lot for Tanis's development, becoming the first king of the intermediate period to uphold the rich cultural traditions of the past. Amenemhat, the high priest of Amun in Tanis, 1001 BC, 992 BC. Amenemhat was most probably one of the sons of Susenes and Queen Mentuhotep, and he succeeded his illustrious father to the throne of Tanis, taking the title of High Priest of Amun in Tanis, as his father had before him. Once ascending to the throne, Amenemhat took the name Userkaf Setepen Amun. There is some confusion about his ascension to the throne. Scholars believe he took the throne only after a co-regency with his father. The priesthood of Amun recognized Amenemhat's authority as the high priest of Amun at Thebes. We know this because his name appeared in 9 different funerary artifacts. Unfortunately, besides his name appearing on funerary artifacts and his burial, we do not know much about his reign or what kind of king he was. All we know about him is that he adorned the temple of Isis and modified a Memphis temple. Amenemhat's tomb was initially small in the royal necropolis in Tanis. However, a few years later, he reburied his mummified remains in the chamber next to Susenes IV, a chamber originally intended for his mother. His tomb and sarcophagus were far less opulent than his father's, and his funerary mask was gilt with gold leaf. His father's sarcophagus was made of pure silver. The tomb also contained a few jewelry pieces, but none were as elaborate as those in his father's tomb. When doctors examined Amenemhat's mummified remains, they discovered that he had been a man with a muscular build and had died quite old. Further investigation revealed that the pharaoh had died of a skull infection that may have been meningitis. We do not know whether Amenemhat had any wives or children, but after 9 unremarkable years of reigning in Tanis as the Egyptian pharaoh, he was succeeded by Userkaf the Elder. Userkaf did not seem to have any familial relationship with him. Userkaf the Elder, the first Meshwesh pharaoh, 992 BC, 986 BC. Amenemhat was the last pharaoh of Egyptian descent. Userkaf the Elder, the first pharaoh of ancient Libyan or Meshkesh descent, took the throne of Egypt, or at least Tanis, after his brief reign. Userkaf, also called Osachor in Manetho's writings, was Shoshenq a great chief of the Ma, and his wife Mentuhotep. Ma, or Meshwesh, means Libyan in ancient Egyptian. Like in the case of Amenemnisu, Scholars did not believe that Userkaf existed until as late as 1963, when Egyptologist Eric Young argued that a pharaoh of the 21st dynasty, named Akheperre and Userkaf the Elder, was the same. He backed up his claim by presenting a fragment of a document from the Karnak priest Annals, which referenced Akheperre as the pharaoh under whom the priest Nespaneferhor was inducted into the temple of Karnak. Unfortunately, the link was too tenuous for other scholars, and his theory failed. It took until 1977 for another Egyptologist, Jean Yoyot, to publish a paper highlighting the fact that a Libyan monarch by the name of Userkaf the Elder was the son of Shoshenq A and Mentuhotep A, and that his mother was given the title King's Mother in a specific genealogical document. Coyote also pointed out that Mentuhotep was also the name of Pharaoh Akheperre mother. Since no other king called Userkaf had a mother by this name, it was only logical to conclude that the two kings were the same person. Userkaf is also considered the uncle of the founder of the 22nd dynasty. The pharaoh was Nimlot A's brother, also a great chief of Ma. Nimlot A was the father of Shoshenq III, who later became the first pharaoh of the 22nd dynasty. According to Manetho's history, Userkaf the Elder's reign lasted just 6 years, but it was important because it marked the coming of the 22nd dynasty, when Egypt was no longer ruled by pharaohs of Egyptian descent but of Libyan descent. The next pharaoh of Egypt was Siamun, but it is unclear whether he was Userkaf's son or an Egyptian native unrelated to the elder in any way. Siamun, the son of Amun. 986 BC, 967 BC. Siamun was the penultimate ruler of the 21st dynasty and was considered the most potent pharaoh after Psusenes. His name means the son of Amun, and the name he adopted when he ascended to the throne of Egypt, Necherkhepere translates to divine, is the manifestation of Ra, chosen of Amun. Manetho had stated that Siamun ruled only for 9 years. However, after vast research, scholars universally agree that this pharaoh ruled for 19 years. This is due to the discovery of evidence in a fragment of the Karnak priest's Annals, which mention the 17th year of Siamun's reign. The event. Interestingly, this was the first time in recorded Egyptian history that the word pharaoh was officially used as a king's title. Former monarchs like Ramses II and Psusenes I were named, and pharaoh was used to refer to kingship. Thus, starting with Siamun, referring to Egypt's kings as pharaohs became the norm. So, Siamun was officially referred to as Pharaoh Siamun, his successor Pharaoh Psusenes II, etc. Once again, little is known about Siamun's family and connection to his predecessor. Some scholars say that his queen, Karimala, was the daughter of Userkaf the Elder, because she is referred to as the king's daughter and king's wife. This would make sense since it would explain how an Egyptian could take the throne after a Libyan king. However, this is just conjecture since no documented evidence exists to prove or disprove this theory. During his 19-year reign, Siamun became the most prolific builder of the Third Intermediate Period. He worked on doubling the already massive Temple of Amun at Tanis, and carried out building works at the Temple of Horus in Mazan, at Heliopolis, and even at Pyramus. This pharaoh also constructed a brand new Temple of Amun in Memphis. There are also several monuments in Thebes on which he appears eponymously. He is recorded having ordered the moving and reburial of royal mummies of the New Kingdom from the Valley of the Kings to the Deir el-Bahari tomb and sealed it to prevent grave robbery. A relief fragment on a wall at the Temple of Amun in Tanis shows how Siamun gained victory over these enemies. The remnants of the scene depict Siamun wielding a mace to subdue his enemies. All we can see of the prisoners are 2 arms, whose hands are a double-bladed axe. One Egyptologist claims that this axe's design points to Siamun's enemies, the Philistines, and that this relief painting on the temple walls was created to commemorate his victory against them. However, another Egyptologist refutes this claim, feeling that this relief is a fictitious battle scene, since no archaeological evidence of the Philistines ever having used axes in battle. Siamun is credited with developing an active foreign policy. According to some scholars, Siamun is the unnamed pharaoh mentioned in the Old Testament of the Bible, who offered his daughter's hand in marriage to King Solomon of Israel to seal an alliance between the two kingdoms against the Palestinians. In keeping with the terms of the alliance between the two kingdoms, Siamun attacked the city of Gezer in Palestine. However, the pharaoh also had a vested interest in attacking the Palestinian city. The nation of Palestine was threatening Egypt's commercial ties with Phoenicia, and it was the perfect time to attack. Gezer had been considerably weakened by the biblical wars that King Solomon's father, King David, had waged against the Palestinians. The city was too weak to put up resistance against Siamun's forces. Siamun then gifted the city of Gezer to King Solomon, allowing the Israeli king to secure his kingdom's southern border. Since then, Gezer has remained a part of ancient Israel. King Solomon's marriage to Siamun's daughter was the final part of the deal between the two monarchs, cementing their alliance. The Bible briefly mentions this alliance, stating that an Egyptian king attacked Gezer, destroyed the city, and killed all the Canaanites who lived there. Then, he presented the city to Solomon as a dowry when he wed the Egyptian king's daughter. According to Egyptologist Kenneth Kitchen, the story in the Bible refers to Siamun. This is because King Solomon's ascension to the throne of Israel dates to around 971 BC or 970 BC. This would mean that Solomon became king in the middle of Siamun's reign. However, historians Paul Ash and Mark Chavalas disagree with this theory. According to them, there is no clear evidence that Siamun and Solomon ruled their lands at the same time. Another scholar, Professor Edward Lipinski, refutes Kitchen's assertion that the Bible story refers to Siamun. According to him, Gezer was an unfortunate city that was destroyed in the late 10th century BC Amun and Siamun. He feels that the Egyptian king who destroyed Gezer was Pharaoh Shoshenq I, the first ruler of the 22nd dynasty. Lipinski also supports Ash and Chavalas's point that Solomon and Siamun did not rule simultaneously. He states that Siamun had died before Solomon became king of Israel. Pharaoh Siamun's tomb has never been found, but it is speculated that his mummy is one of the two wholly decayed mummies discovered in Psusennes-Theron's tomb. This supposition is based on the Ushaptis found on these mummies, which bore Pharaoh Siamun's name. Ushaptis are small figurines placed inside a tomb along with the mummy. These figurines, covered in Book of the Dead writings, depicted agricultural servants in the land of the dead. Once again, scholars have speculated that it is probable that the waters of the Nile Delta inundated Siamun's tomb, causing his body to be moved to Susenna's tomb. After he died in 967 BC, Siamun was succeeded to the throne of Egypt by Pharaoh Susennes II, also called Hor-Pasebakaieniot II. Susennes II, the priest-king of Amun, 967 BC, 943 BC. Susennes II, known by his royal name Hor-Pasebakaieniot II, was the last of the 21st dynasty pharaohs. The name he took when he ascended to the throne of Egypt, Hor-Pasebakaieniot II, means image of the transformations of Re. There is an inscription on a wall in the temple of Abydos that spells out all the titles of a pharaoh called Tietkepere Setepenre Pasebakaieniot Meriamun, which is the Egyptian name of Psusennes II. This monarch carries the titles of Supreme Military Commander, High Priest of Amun, and the King of Gods. Furthermore, since the Pharaoh of Egypt in Tanis and the High Priest of Amun in Thebes were both called Psusennes II, modern-day scholars say that the last pharaoh of the 21st dynasty was both king and a high priest, since all evidence points to the fact that he did not give up his title of High Priest of Amun after he was crowned pharaoh. Susenes II was the only king of the 21st dynasty who could rule over the entire kingdom, not just part of it. We have more information about Susenes II's family than any other dynasty king. The dynasty king was the son of the previous high priest of Amun, Pinigem II, and his wife, Istemkeb. He had a daughter named Matkare-B, who became the great royal wife of Pharaoh Osorkon I. Unlike the other kings of the 21st dynasty, Dynasty Is has plenty of evidence from Susenes II that the pharaoh existed and ruled over the land of Egypt for a long time. There is an old Thutmose III statue with 2 columns of inscriptions, one about Susenes II and the other about his successor, Shoshenq I. A block of stone unearthed in the ruins of Tel Basta, the current Arabic name for the ancient city of Per-Bast, mentions the Egyptian names of both Shoshenq I and Susenes II. A graffito on the wall of Theban tomb. Number 18 revealed another piece of evidence of Susenes II's rule. Regrettably, we have now lost that piece of writing on the wall. The time that Susenes II ruled was also controversial. Manetho's timeline stated that the pharaoh ruled for just 14 years. However, after examining all the available evidence, modern scholars believe that Susenes ruled for 24 years. Sadly, this is all we know about Susenes II. There is even less information about his rule than the other 21st century kings. He was likely powerful since he was the head of state and the priesthood. We have no idea about his accomplishments as a leader of Egyptian civilization, what kind of man he was, or what his people thought of him. In the end, while there is not much information about the rulers of the 21st dynasty, the little we know about them points to 3 strong and 3 weak rulers. The most powerful of the rulers was undoubtedly Susenes I, who also ruled the longest. He is the king who changed the face of Tanis and made Lower Egypt great again. Siamun advanced Susenes I's approach by implementing a robust foreign policy. He cemented relations with his neighbors to ensure his country's safety, and Susenes II once more unified the land of Egypt as both king and high priest. The 21st dynasty ended the reign of pure Egyptian kings, and the 22nd dynasty began the rise of the Libyan pharaohs, beginning with Shoshenq I, who had been Susenes II's commander-in-chief. Susenes II's daughter Matkare married his son, establishing a marriage between Susenes II and Shoshenq. Moreover, because of this relationship between Pharaoh Susenes II and Shoshenq I, the transition of power from Egyptian hands to Libyan was smooth, barely causing a ripple in the ancient Egyptians' lives. We are finally nearing the end of ancient Egypt's line of dynasties. In its early history, we have set foot in a vast expanse of arid land that has yet to house one of the defining symbols of this preeminent civilization, the Pyramids of Giza. Through the unification of its upper and lower crust, we have witnessed the foundation of a proud civilization. Moreover, since then, we have religiously followed Egypt's timeline, complete with war, threats of foreign invasion, famine, the Nile's inundation, and everything else in between. So far, these obstacles and triumphs have solidified Egypt as a supreme power in the ancient world. However, the fate of Egypt's ancient civilization remains uncertain for the 22nd dynasty. Dynasty 22 may be nearing its end rather than its beginning, yet it has not yet reached its end. Despite the advanced placement of this period in a long line of Egypt's history, there is still a lot to cover, many coronations of kings and queens to attend, and plenty of cycles that the monarchy still has to go through. With all that said, we are again at the foot of a new dynasty. Egypt, as a unified nation, is now 22 dynasties old. We recently closed the chapter on the difficult times of the Egyptian throne's slow decline. We have covered 21 dynasties, and there are still about 8 more. However, we will concentrate on the 22nd dynasty, which marked Egypt's reunification following the Third Intermediate Period. Grab your favorite beverage and sit back as we recount another important dynasty in Egypt's history, the 22nd dynasty, a period of immense difficulty in ancient Egypt. Egypt's rise from Third Intermediate Period. To get to know the 22nd dynasty and deeply appreciate its core contributions to history, it is important to recount the events that occurred during it. After all, the time that preceded the events in the 22nd dynasty was ultimately turbulent and downright chaotic, as some might say. You see, the Third Intermediate Period, correct to the characteristics of all the other intermediate periods, was a time of final skirmish. Egypt was plunged into a state of disarray, and the authority of the throne was caught in a constant tug-of-war between Thebes and Tanis. In Thebes, the agenda was heavily based on theocracy. All state decisions had to be supported by religion. The gods and their interpretation ruled the land. Every minor or significant decision had to be brought before the god Amun. In other words, the state god was considered the nation's ruler and king. This conflicts with the way the politicians in Tanis governed themselves. On the other hand, this city favored circumstances and the people's way of life. Policies were created. These two powerhouses continuously transferred the legitimacy of power back and forth between themselves. Undoubtedly, the nation has always experienced a significant amount of conflict. However, the Third Intermediate Period, a period of darkness, was unlike any previous conflict. The two previous collapses of the empire were not as devastating or destructive as this one. That said, one can only imagine the relief that followed this period. Nevertheless, relief is still a somewhat optimistic description of what transpired after. The only positive thing about the previous intermediate periods is that they represented a time before Egypt's prominence. However, no new kingdom prosperity followed the Third Intermediate Period, only the late period. Therefore, the ancient Egyptians did not enjoy relief for long. Of course, the 22nd dynasty immediately followed the time of disunity under the Third Intermediate Period. The 21st dynasty had the brunt of the consequences of the time. The kings were not Egyptian natives, but Libyans ruling under Egyptian names. These effects trickled down to the rulers and the people of ancient Egypt in the 22nd dynasty. Despite this recorded darkness in ancient Egypt's history, we cannot help but marvel at the artistic gifts it bestowed on Egyptologists and the world. Although not many constructions were initiated during this time, some of the most majestic and innovative tomb arts, paintings, and intricate inscriptions were born from this era. An introduction to the 22nd dynasty. By recounting the preceding time, we have established the core foundations of the 22nd dynasty and now explore the events that happened during this period. The year is approximately 945 BC, marking the end of the previous dynasty and the emergence of a new set of rulers in Egypt. In the 21st dynasty, the rulers were Libyans who took on Egyptian names. However, in the 22nd dynasty, the rulers waived all pretenses and now openly identified as foreigners. They even foregone their Egyptian aliases and took on their original Libyan names. We are greeted by King Shoshenq I, who took on the task of unifying Egypt and spearheading military campaigns to expand Egypt's borders. Scholars speculate that the Bible mentions this king as Shishak in 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles. He allegedly ransacked Jerusalem and stole treasures from Solomon's temple there. However, scholars have since challenged this theory by saying that Shoshenq had traveled to Judah and Israel, but there have been no mentions of his men ransacking the city of Jerusalem. Aside from this somewhat controversial claim, his military campaigns had successfully increased the nation's wealth. In a way, he had restored a semblance of a balanced and prosperous age, which was often associated with Egypt's state at the height of the New Kingdom. In addition to his military campaigns, Shoshenq worked on reforms for both Thebes and Tanis. One of his significant contributions to ancient Egyptian religion was abolishing the rule that the priesthood was merely a hereditary position. Instead, he decreed that it would be an appointed position by the king. However, the peak of the 22nd dynasty passed with the death of its first king. The following rulers sought to ride on his accomplishments, barely contributing to the economy and their duties to improve the state's governance. Or at least this is the synthesis of scholars regarding the 10 other kings who followed the founder Shoshenq. To truly understand what happened and how all 11 pharaohs of Egypt contributed to the dynasty, we must get to know them ourselves. Although there has been no established chronological order of the rulers of Egypt during the 22nd dynasty, dynasties have pinpointed 11 pharaohs who ruled during this time. Let us get to know all of them in the next chapters of this book. The Bubastite kings of the 22nd dynasty. As we mentioned earlier, the rulers of the 22nd dynasty were of Egyptian descent. Instead, they were a line of 11 Meshwesh Libyans who took the throne from around 945 BC to about 716 BC. They were on the throne for an era popularly called the Bubastite dynasty, because they ruled from the city founded by Shoshenq V, the city of Bubastis. Let us explore the 22nd dynasty through the lenses of these 11 famed leaders. Shoshenq I. The founding leader of the 22nd dynasty is Shoshenq V. He was born to Meshwesh parents and had been the direct descendant of the chief of the Ma Shoshenq A himself. It is presumed that his ancestors had settled in Egypt in the latter part of the New Kingdom. This means that he was not in any way an Egyptian. However, he did serve the Egyptian army as the commander-in-chief and eventually as the advisor to the pharaoh before him, King Julius II. He married Susene's daughter, Matkare, later securing his legitimacy to the throne. Shoshenq I took an aggressive stance in fortifying the land's existing foreign policies regarding expanding territories and cementing Egypt's power. Through these aggressive campaigns, he earned his people's respect. Furthermore, centuries later, through the same aggressive campaigning, we would uncover his name in the statues of some Middle Eastern kingdoms, such as Syria, Israel, and Lebanon. However, instead of speculating that he had been the Shishak in the Bible, Shoshenq I's list of conquered cities did not include Jerusalem. On the one hand, his domestic policies further established his and his successors' claim to Egypt's throne. While he may have terminated the hereditary model of succession for the priesthood of Amun, he made sure to follow the Libyan concept that the throne was to be passed down by blood and marriage. Shoshenq I elevated Egypt's economic state through all his military campaigns during his reign. Some 21 years later, he was commemorated as the leader who had salvaged Egypt from the bowels of chaos and destruction and brought back its glory. He died in a currently undiscovered tomb, likely located in Memphis. Userkaf I. As his father ascertained, Userkaf I took on the throne after the death of Shoshenq III. Like his father, he still raided other far-off kingdoms, but he initiated several buildings and temples. Eventually, he took on an Egyptian name and went by Sekhemkepere, which translates to, "Powerful are the manifestations of Re." His reign was less progressive regarding military campaigns and raids on foreign lands. However, he had been a rather prolific builder. In his presumed 33 years of reign as the pharaoh, he occupied himself with many buildings. However, Manetho only credits about 15 years to the young king in his accounts. Subsequently, the discovery of Nakhtemut's mummy, believed to be the king himself, will challenge this claim. The mummy's inscription was Year 33 Second Heb Sed, which could only have referred to the king's Egyptian name and the number of years he served as pharaoh. Userkaf I's rule over this period in Egypt's history was relatively uneventful. As far as people had hoped, uneventful had been synonymous with peace during this time. Indeed, the period was peaceful. at least compared to the years that preceded and would follow his reign. We say this because Egypt will eventually experience another bout of conflict under Takalot I and Osorkon II's reign, his son and grandson. It would have made sense for his son Takalot I to succeed Osorkon I after his death. However, scholars have noted an interim in Egypt's succession, which leads us to believe that Shoshenq II, likely Osorkon's brother, had another ruler, Shoshenq II. Now we move on to a potential usurper to the throne, Shoshenq II, Osorkon I's brother and Shoshenq I's son. Although not much is known about his rule, the discovery of his tomb led to the development of numerous theories. For one, some evidence establishes the date of his reign to be right between that of Takalot I and Osorkon I. Although he was buried with much gold and other items from the royal treasury, his tomb was one of the rare royal mortuary complexes that tomb raiders had not touched. How was his reign established after Osorkon and not before him? This is mainly due to the stylistic approach to designing his coffin. King Harsiese A, a contemporary of Osorkon II, designed a hawk-headed coffin for his burial. The implication is that Shoshenq II's reign and death occurred after the king's death from Medinet Habu. However, another theory says that Shoshenq I had served as a co-regent to the throne, reigning alongside Osorkon I. This time, Kenneth Kitchen theorizes that he had been the latter's son. Because Shoshenq I during his reign had made sure that the priests of Amun were to be appointed by the king himself, he further speculates that his supposed father had given Shoshenq II two responsibilities, Osorkon Iso. First, Kitchen says that he had been appointed as the high priest for Amun's cult, and then eventually as a co-regent to the throne until his death. However, no evidence supports this postulation, and Shoshenq II remains a brief usurper to the throne. His established cause of death had been a septic infection due to a head wound. Takeout 1. Taklot I, a son of Osorkon I, took on the throne next. Scholars, including Manethor, have pinpointed his total service to Egypt at 13 years. During his time, there had been a burgeoning rebellion in Upper Egypt. At that time, a local Theban king named Harsiese A had begun to challenge Takalot I's authority. However, some disputes exist regarding the rulers involved in this power struggle. In particular, the key texts do not mention the king's names. This leads modern scholars to believe there might have been a dispute in the succession of the throne following Osorkon I's death. They say that Takalot I was not favored nor recognized as the king in the upper region of Egypt, allowing Harsiese, the high priest Shoshenq C's son, to gather sympathizers and followers. They also mentioned a king named Matkapere, portraying him as a rival to Takalot I. In all accounts, we can then presume that Takalot I's reign had not been without conflict. He faced challenges to the legitimacy of his power and the nation's ongoing dissatisfaction. His reign of 13 years is relatively short, at least in comparison to that of his father, Osorkon I, and his successor, Osorkon II. His tomb was discovered with the royal scarab inscription, Takalot Marianum. Osorkon II was said to have honored his name by reburying him in the royal tomb complex in Tanite. When his father died, Osorkon II interred the same son with him. Nevertheless, he was to first take over the high position as the fifth king of the 22nd dynasty, Dynasty II. At the death of Takalot I, his son Osorkon II took over the throne. Just as his predecessors did, he ruled from Tanis, the capital of the time. When Osorkon II inherited the throne, there was a skirmish up north where his cousin, Harsiese A, had established himself as the region's king, including the western oasis of Egypt and Thebes. However, the challenge to Osorkon's power did not last long. When Horus died, the king immediately appointed his son, Nimlot C, as the high priest of the cult of Amun. This re-established his dominance over the regions that had gone rogue during his time. Because of the obstacles to a peaceful reign, Userkaf II was forced to lead with an iron fist. His policies, both foreign and domestic, were aggressive. For example, during his time there was a growing power in Assyria. He used a substantial state budget to suppress any potential rebellion. He also devoted his time and resources to many construction projects. One of his more famous works was the Temple of Bastet, found in the city of Bubastis. Its halls were adorned with scenes from the Sed festival and images of Oscaron's queen, Karamama. With an aggressive campaign to expand Egypt and protect all the existing territories, Userkaf II's reign was relatively peaceful and prosperous. During this period, there was also a renewed interest in constructing temples and monuments. In his reign of more than 30 years, he re-established Egypt's construction power and prowess. Userkaf II's tomb, which had been constructed as an annex to that of his father, was found in Tanis. Despite their plundered state, fragments on the coffin and some jars confirm the tomb's authenticity. Shoshenq III. We now meet Shoshenq III, who ruled the 22nd dynasty of Egypt for about 38 years. Scholars are certain that he was not the son of Oscaron II, the previous king. Jedbastes Ankh was the daughter of a high priest of Ptah named Takalot. Shoshenq III also went by the name of King Usermatre Setepenre. During the 8th year of his reign, Shoshenq III completely dissolved Egypt's capricious peace. Shoshenq III had forfeited political unity, leaving the rest of the 22nd dynasty kings in control of Lower Egypt. Pedubast I, another ruler, had taken control of Upper Egypt. With Egypt again divided, the people had to readjust to this new normal. Despite his long reign, Shoshenq III's responsibilities have significantly shifted to overseeing the lower part of Egypt. Shoshenq III was buried in a tomb in Tanis after his death. Soon after, robbers looted the same tomb, Shoshenq IV. It is important to note that there is quite an ongoing debate regarding Shoshenq IV's reign. A scholar named David Rohl suggests that there had only been 2 rulers named Shoshenq, the dynasty's founder, and another pharaoh who had ruled at an unestablished time. However, other scholars, spearheaded by David Rohl, quickly settled the issue, establishing Shoshenq IV as the head of Lower Egypt. However, Rohl's assumption was not entirely incorrect. Shoshenq IV used the same prenomen as Shoshenq I, thus confusing many scholars. However, he also used a no to distinguish him from the first Shoshenq, said none was Shoshenq Meriamun Sibast Netcher Hekawaset Netcher Hekaon. None of the previous kings had deviated from the standard epithet Merianum in their time. Shoshenq III established Shoshenq IV's rule using his Sai-Bast epithet. Eventually, they dug up his tomb and found items bearing his name. The previous 22nd dynasty rulers did not use the last epithet, Netcher Hekaon. This further establishes the time of Shoshenq IV's rule and burial grounds. Instead, the controversially established king rests in the same tomb as his predecessor, Shoshenq III. Pami. Usermatre Setepenre Pami, known as Pami, ruled Egypt for 7 years. His name in Egyptian directly translates to the cat, or sometimes as he who belongs to the cat. It is unclear how Pami came to inherit the throne and his relationship with his predecessor, Shoshenq IV. Scholars, however, have established that Pami was the father of Shoshenq V. Speculation in previous years suggested that Pami was Pine, the son of Shoshenq III. Although I may have served as the great chief of Ma under Shoshenq III, it is later established that he is not the Pami who would eventually sit on the throne. The translations of their names further establish a distinction. Pami stands for the cat, while Pinai can be translated as the lion. As for the length of his reign, it has been discovered that 2 Apis bulls were buried in the 2nd and 6th years of Pami's reign. Although scholars have not retrieved any accounts of Pami's reign, archaeologists have dug up 7 blocks in an enclosure wall at Heliopolis. This served as a chronicle of the number of years that Pami had been in power. Little is known beyond that he had made annual donations to the gods at the great temple of Heliopolis, Shoshenq 5. The next pharaoh on the list of leaders of the 22nd dynasty is Pami's son, Shoshenq V. As with most of the other kings in the 22nd dynasty, little is known about Shoshenq V. It is said, however, that he had taken the throne for a beneficial 38 years, establishing him as one of the kings of the dynasty, a long reign. However, the years of his rule in Egypt significantly reduced the scale of this triumph. This is due to increased independent kings, princes, and tribal chiefs. Many years later, Egypt found itself once more divided. We know very little about the reign of Shoshenq V. We have only used the attestations bearing his name to determine some of his triumphs during his 38-year reign. Only the Nile Delta, slightly to the east, has yielded these discoveries. As had been expected, there have been no monuments nor records of the king in Thebes. By all accounts, he was simply a Tanis king. However, we know he lost his authority over Memphis, and some western cities came under the throne's jurisdiction. Some Libyan tribal chiefs reportedly seized control of the land. Eventually, Shoshenq V only governed Tanis, Bubastis, and little else in Egypt's once vast realm. Some temples built in his honor include the temple for the Theban triad founded in Tanis. He also built a chapel in his 30th year during the Sed festival. However, they eventually demolished these temples, leaving a sacred lake in their place. In 730 BC. We know nothing else about his lineage except that his father had been Pami. Userkaf IV eventually succeeded him, with Pedubast II acting as king. Pedubast II. We can only assume that Pedubast ruled as a 22nd dynasty king due to the uncertainty of succession. Although some scholars attribute his reign to the 23rd dynasty, dynastyrs Diane Hilton and Aidan Dodson established Pedubast as rulers in the 22nd dynasty. Dynastyrs Diane Hilton and Aidan Dodson further established that Pedubast ruled between his father, Shoshenq V, and Userkaf IV. On the other hand, according to Jürgen von Beckerath's accounts, Pedubast would have been the king of the 23rd dynasty. Dynasty included Pedubast II in this book to chronicle all possible kings of the 22nd dynasty. The dynasty of his reign is unknown, but some estimate it to be 736 to 731 BC. Theorists speculate that he might have been Input II's son. This Tanis king, Pedubast II, eventually took on the royal name of Sehetep-Benre. Archaeologists have unearthed several stone blocks buried in his honor. Everything else about his claim to the throne, reign, and end is unknown. Even his tomb is yet to be located. Userkaf IV. Finally, we reach the long line of kings in the 22nd dynasty. Userkaf IV, the son of Shoshenq V, was the last ruler of the 22nd dynasty, and he had only been the ruler of Lower Egypt, specifically Tanis and Bubastis' cities. In some Assyrian accounts, Userkaf V is known as King Shilkani. Scholars also assume he was the Egyptian king mentioned in the second book of Kings regarding biblical relations. As the last king of the 22nd dynasty, Userkaf IV was assigned to one of the darkest periods of ancient Egypt's history. Multiple Libyan kingdoms had conquered the Nile Delta during his time of power. In other words, the Kingdom of Egypt only granted jurisdiction to Userkaf IV in the easternmost part. This area was a place of complete chaos. Political disorder and military rebellion were abundant in the land. Userkaf IV fought for order and recognition as the king throughout his reign. In the first few years on the throne, Userkaf IV faced a rebellion led by the Kushite king Paye. To protect the kingdom and the throne, Userkaf IV decided to band with other rulers in Lower and Middle Egypt to drive off the Nubian ruler. This coalition was headed by the chief of the West Tefnacht and was joined by Input II and Nimlot of Hermopolis on top of Userkaf IV. Despite the stronghold, Paye still managed to advance. With rebellion and the Neo-Assyrian Empire's persistent threat at his doorstep, Userkaf IV eventually submitted to Kushite king Paye. Userkaf recorded that the palace had not allowed him to enter when he decided to pay homage to his soon-to-be ruler. This is because the king had not been circumcised on top of eating a diet that consisted of meat and fish, both unacceptable practices based on the Nubians' beliefs. Despite not being physically welcome in their homes, the Nubians eventually allowed Userkaf IV and his allies to maintain authority over their realm. Userkaf IV's diplomacy effectively halted the impending attack of Assyrian king Sargon II. At this point, the king had developed a skill for appeasing potential adversaries. He met with the Assyrian king and offered gifts, which he said to have been 12 large horses of Egypt without equals in Assyria. Because of this diplomatic move, the Assyrian king decided not to pillage the land. In the end, Userkaf IV still lost authority over the land. Some archaeological findings point to another king who successfully supplanted Userkaf IV shortly after. Eventually, the 22nd dynasty was at the end of Oscaron's reign. Life in the 22nd dynasty. The dynasty spent about 230 years under the rule of the 11 kings mentioned in the previous chapter. In its first 70 years, the country was at peace. Life under the first 3 monarchs of the 22nd dynasty was similar to the prior years of economic strength and power. At this stage, the Egyptians had carried on with their usual keep, barter and trade, agriculture, and possibly some artistic pursuit. Most right age and healthy men were also taken into the Egyptian army, marching with the king to protect and expand the realm in all Egyptian corners. Under Takalot II's reign, a civil war broke out, and Egypt again divided. From here, Egypt's decline began its rapid momentum. Lands were lost, and the original vast reach of the throne was severely decreased to just the 2 cities of Tanis and Bubastis. One can only imagine the rampant confusion and chaos throughout the land. They likely lost lives, pillaged villages, and forced young men to fight for the glory of the kingdom. No economy thrives in a war, and ancient Egypt during the 22nd dynasty is an exception. On top of the annual flooding of the Nile that had been the only problem of the earlier kings in the first few dynasties, war and the impending takeover of the throne kept the latter kings of the dynasty in an instant state of trepidation. There are only limited accounts of the events in the 22nd dynasty. These accounts were destroyed amidst the fray of the war, so we are left to weave together a narrative of the lives of normal men and women during this time. As a result, we can empathize with the potential hardships they faced. So, with this thought, we leave you with the uncertainty of the dynasties that will follow. Egypt's history continues despite the horrors of the 22nd dynasty. Dynasty, 25th dynasty. Egypt's preeminent culture is as rich as the line of pharaohs that once ruled the land. It can be considered the sum of all the kingdom's cultures that once comprised this foremost superpower in the ancient world. Once united, power was consolidated from several kings to just one, the pharaoh. And so the power to govern fell upon the shoulders of the pharaoh, the direct connection of men and their gods. After his death, his sons assumed power, establishing the first Egyptian dynasty. Over time, as supremacy over the land was passed on, jumping from one family tree to the next over the centuries, scholars decided to segment the timeline into dynasties. As ancient historians used rulers' succession to chronicle their events, modern Egyptologists followed their chronology to study this fascinating ancient civilization. Now that we have covered 24 dynasties, we still have a few more to explore. However, we will focus on one crucial dynasty. The core source we follow in this book is Manetho's Chronicles. This historian from ancient times enormously contributed to our understanding of the Egyptian civilization. Other ancient historians have referenced Manetho, a scholar from 300 BC, and his revered work, the Egyptica. Although Egyptica itself has been lost, Manetho's chronicles have been preserved in others' works, such as those of Josephus from AD 70. Manetho has divided ancient Egyptian history into 30 dynasties of ruling families. Although in some cases the land was divided into several political and social groups, these dynasties remain to be utilized as a basis for telling when certain events took place. This is partly because of the lack of a precise method for telling time and dates. Native Egyptian pharaohs made up the early dynasties of Egypt, but foreign rulers who had successfully conquered the country eventually took the throne. This trend was particularly the norm during the Third Intermediate Period of Egyptian history, a time of strife and fragmented authority. Moreover, there was much civil unrest in the same period as invading Libyan kings and princes claimed areas for themselves, making it easier for Kush's more powerful kingdom to take over. Thus, this is how we enter the 25th dynasty. Dynasty has all but fallen, and Egypt has been, once again, plunged into uncertain times. This time, the particular period in Egypt's timeline that we enter has established the nation as the Kingdom of Kush, the Kingdom of Kush. In ancient Nubia, Kush's kingdom had once established its authority in a land now called Sudan. It had managed to do so following the disunification of the new kingdom. Although formerly centered in Napata, it grew in size and control. In due time, it was able to take over Egypt and held its firm grasp over the nation for a long time. Because of its long trade history and Egypt's invasion, the Kushites acquired many of ancient Egypt's customs and practices. Although they were eventually defeated by the Assyrian Empire and were forced to retreat to the south, they managed to rule for over 3/4 of a century over Egypt's stronghold. Although this rather hostile takeover had not been unnecessarily uncalled for, the Kingdom of Kush was once conquered by the Egyptians in its early history, around the time of the Old Kingdom. The Kush people were probably reclaiming their land and considered themselves as entitled to govern as the Egyptians. Although heavily influenced by the Egyptians, it is undeniable how rich the Kushites' culture was. They must meld Egyptian culture into their own, creating the most breathtaking art and practices. Kush's kingdom is credited for shaping northeastern Africa's political and cultural landscape. Their affinity with the ancient Egyptian culture and religion and their political dealings with the different groups in the area molded Egypt's modern culture and politics that we know today. The kingdom was a hub for diverse cultures, attracting traders from the Arabian Desert, the Mediterranean, and the African interior. In their prime, the center of Kush's kingdom had been considered a large cosmopolitan known for its wealth as gold, ivory, ebony, and animals were traded in the area. Ancient Egyptian documents and art typically depicted the Kushites as dark-skinned individuals with cropped hair. They dressed in animal skin and adorned themselves with huge earrings. Introduction to Ancient Egypt's 25th dynasty. The dynasty Kingdom of Kush gained enough firepower in men and resources, and they plotted their re-entry into Egyptian lands. The Kushites believed Egypt, especially the upper region, was Amun's land. Amun was their revered supreme god. This belief served as their driving force. They set up strategies to conquer Amun's land. On top of this, they set off to stake their claim on what they considered a foreign land, more popularly known as Lower Egypt, which various lower kings and princes then ruled. This invasion of the Nubians from the kingdom of Kush led to the start of the 25th dynasty, a dynasty known as the reign of the Black Kings. These kings originated in what is now known as the northern part of Sudan in the north of Africa. They saw Napata as their spiritual homeland and perceived themselves as the god Amun's sons, seeking to reunite the god's old domain with Egypt in the north and Nubia in the south. The 25th dynasty of ancient Egypt lasted from around 760 BC to 656 BC, starting with the Nubian invasion of Upper Egypt and ending with the destruction of the Kushite Empire after several years of war with the Assyrian Empire. This period saw the enormous Egyptian empire since the New Kingdom as the Kushite kings endeavored to reunify the smaller kingdoms into one. At this time, the seat of power was located in Napata, with the kingdom stretching from there to Meroe and Egypt. Despite its rather bloody beginnings, the period was considered relatively stable. It had a robust governance structure, with the upper class ruling over the different regions. Aggressive attempts to further expand the empire to the east also highlighted its significance. It also saw a significant revival of long-abandoned religious practices. We can trace back the beginning of this reunification to Kashta, the Kushite, when he and his southern army invaded Egypt around the 8th century BC. During this time, the Kushite kings saw an opportunity to make their entrance amidst all the unrest between the minor kingdoms fighting over the nation's resources and power. Ancient Egyptian religious traditions and art experienced a renaissance with this new beginning. Naturally, the resurgence of this long-lost culture coincided with the introduction of artisans to the Kushite culture. Most famous for the first widespread construction of pyramids and cities in the Nile, up to Sudan. These pharaohs restarted the tradition of burying royalty in pyramids along El Kuru and Nuri, long after it had ended several hundred years ago. The dynasty saw a lot of building and restoration of temples and monuments along the Nile Valley, specifically Karnak, Kawa, Jebel Barkal, and Memphis. How Kashta conquered Egypt. Kashta was a Kushite king of the 8th century BC. His name is literally the Kushite, and he was well known for bringing Egypt and the kingdom of Kush together. His beginnings can be traced back to ancient Nubia, where he was the successor of Alara. He was best known for conquering Upper Egypt and controlling it until he could merge the different ancient Egyptian regions. Kashta's invasion method was unique in that he used religion as his anchor to secure his seat of power amongst the reigning pharaohs of 8th century ancient Egypt. He had used daughter Amenemhat I to install control within the very religious Upper Egypt. With Amenemhat I claiming to be the god Amun's wife in Thebes, she quickly ascended to be in line in the succession of serving the divine adoratress of Amun, Shepenupet I. This move not only gave Kashta control over Upper Egypt, but also legitimized the Kushite dynasty's rule over the land. In ancient Egypt, the Kushite dynasty was considered the 25th dynasty, which was an ancient civilization and the rise of the Black Kings from the south. Historians have theorized that Kashta's invasion of northern Egypt was peaceful, as members of the previous rulers of the 24th dynasty had high social status in Thebes during the Kushite dynasty. Although the length of his reign is unknown, Kashta successfully merged ancient Kushite and Egyptian cultures. He was succeeded by Paya, who was considered the official Kushite king of the 25th dynasty of ancient Egypt. Kashta, and later the other Kushite kings of the 25th dynasty, took advantage of Egyptian politics fragmentation to conquer each kingdom one by one and rule over Upper and Lower Egypt. They used religion and politics to conquer kingdoms and subdue lords. Paya's Holy War. While Kashta took credit for peacefully taking over Upper Egypt, his successor, Paya, who is considered the first ruler of the 25th dynasty, was the one who successfully uprooted Lower Egypt and successfully merged both the upper and lower regions. Piye, Pianki in older texts, was an ancient Kushite king who ruled Egypt from around 744 to 714 BC. His seat was based in Napata, Nubia. He appointed Nubian vessels to watch over the land he had conquered to secure power over the entire nation. Paye saw himself as the ruler of all lands and was quoted on his stele, as archaeologist Timothy Kendall cited, saying, "Amun granted me to be the ruler of the Black Land and every foreign country." It is theorized that he was referring to Upper Egypt and the kingdom of Kush, while the foreign country is said to be the different kingdoms of Lower Egypt. He ordered his soldiers to conduct ritual cleansing before starting battle, and often sacrificed to the god Amun. During Paye's time, Lower Egypt was considered more political than the upper region, which was considered more religious. His plight was extensively recorded in the hieroglyphic Stele of Victory. This record was later found in the Amun temple at Jebel Barkal. The document outlined his victory in conquering Lower Egypt at its weakest point. He successfully invaded the country by overthrowing the 4 smaller kingdoms that had divided Egypt. These kingdoms were ruled by King Osor IV, King Uput II, King Nimlot, and King Pefjewawibas. The stele talks about how Paye led his Kushite army to capture Memphis's city and received tokens of submission from the 4 kingdoms. Tanutamun of the 24th Dynasty was considered Paye's main adversary. Tenant formed a coalition amongst the lower kings of the Delta region to oppose Paye's invasion and besieged Heracleopolis for half a year. Paye assembled his army and successfully invaded the Middle and Lower Egypt regions. After his conquest, Paye's authority only extended from Thebes to the western desert oases and Heracleopolis, leaving the other Lower Egyptian kings free. The length of Paye's reign is still under debate, as the chronicles of that time were unclear. We have documented the celebration of a Hebsed festival in a king's 30th year, but we have yet to verify it. In the east, where the Assyrian Empire ruled, Paye also tried to increase his power. Despite sending an army to support a rebellion against Assyria, he ultimately faced defeat. Outside his military conquests, Paye's reign was also known for revitalizing the new kingdom's culture. Under his direction, artisans were encouraged to study and restore artifacts of the past. Older shrines and other religious places were also repaired and restored to their former glory. One of his period's most outstanding contributions to Egyptian culture might be revitalizing the moribund Great Temple of Amun at Jebel Barkal. The temple, erected during the New Kingdom under Thutmose II, was a shrine to the Kushites' powerful god, Amun. Paye, like many other Kushite kings, considered Amun their father. Ancient records documented that Paye returned to his homeland, Napata, after successfully conquering the Egyptian Delta. Paye is also credited with reviving the ancient custom of burying dead royals in pyramids. He is said to have been generous to artisans who renovated ancient temples. He was also the first pharaoh in over 500 years to be entombed in a pyramid. His tomb is located in El Kuru near Jebel Barkal. It cuts down a stairway open to the east with the burial chamber and the bedrock with his bed resting in the middle. The tomb houses his beloved horses. Shebitku's place, in the 25th dynasty succession. Shebitku, also known as Shabataka or Shebitko, was also one of the Black Kings of the 25th dynasty. He was a descendant of Paye, the dynasty's first ruler. The latter hailed from the northeastern part of Africa and came to Egyptian land to conquer the then fragmented ancient Egypt. Shebitku's place in the 25th dynasty, like Shabaka's, is currently under debate. Several historians have noted pieces of evidence that Shebitku ruled first, while others have displayed shreds of evidence that he came in later. Further, some also believed that the two rulers had a coexistence, which means that both pharaohs may have ruled side by side, or over Egypt's different areas along the same timeline. Initially, Shabaka was thought to have reigned first. However, evidence found in the 21st century has led archaeologists to believe that it might have been Shabitku who took control of the throne first. To back these claims, archaeologists cite the writings on the upper edge of Gerard Broekman's GM 251, 2017, which showed Shabaka's NLR number 30 year 2, while Shabitku's was written as NLR number 33 year 3. Archaeologists and Egyptologists have also said that Shepenupet I, the last Libyan adoratrix of God's wife of Amun, was alive during Shabitku's reign. Around the middle of his reign, Amenemhat, Shabaka's sister, was named adoratrix, as shown in the Osiris-Hekajet chapel. This could mean the succession between Shepenupet Pham and Amenemhat I happened during Shabitku's reign. Other clues may be found in both the pharaohs' tombs, with Shabitku's tomb resembling that of Paye, the first 25th dynasty king, while Shabaka's burial site is similar to later pharaohs of the dynasty. Other theories about the Shabitku-Shabaka succession include the possibility that both pharaohs ruled Egypt simultaneously. This theory came to life because of Turin's Stela 1467, which illustrates both of them seated together, facing a mob across a sacrificial table. However, the theory was debunked after the stela was found to have been a forgery. Wherever Shabitku might belong in the succession of the 25th Egyptian dynasty, records have illustrated him as a brave ruler who protected the land from foreign invasion threats. Assyrian chronicles have identified him as the king of Egypt who banished the rebel king Ayamani of Ashdod into Sargon II of Assyria's land. The inscription states that after finding Ayamani in Egypt, Shabitku placed him in manacles and handcuffs and sent him to Sargon. The Greek historian Herodotus's history theorizes that Shabitku appeared as a high priest of Ptah named Sethos. It is believed that Sethos was a corrupted version of Shabitku. Herodotus's writings illustrated Sethos as a high priest who became a pharaoh and defeated the Assyrian invasion using what was claimed as sheer divine intervention. Shabitku was involved with the conquest of the northeast. He was documented to have been involved in a massive war against Assyrian king Sennacherib in 701 to prevent Assyria from taking over Egypt. Even though the Egyptians suffered significant losses in that war, including the loss of many Egyptian army members, they prevented the Assyrians from fully capturing Palestine and maintaining their independence in Judah's small kingdom. Shabitku's contribution to building the Kushite power was his ability to conquer the entire Nile Valley. He was said to have ordered the incineration of Bukchoris of the Sais dynasty after the latter had resisted his invasion. Shabaka and his relics. Shabaka, or Shabako, was a son of Kashta and brother to Piye, who ruled over Egypt after Piye returned to his homeland. Shabaka, unlike his brother, spent more time in Egypt and ruled over the land in 712 to 702 BC. He moved the seat of power to Memphis in Upper Egypt and continued what his brother had started regarding the revival of ancient Egyptian artifacts. Some texts of the time also claim him to be the brother of Taharka and his son Piye. He was best known for the relics he left for modern Egyptologists to study. Although there is no contention that Shabaka was a Kushite king who ruled the Egyptian empire in the 25th dynasty, much debate has been about where he belonged in the Nubian king's succession. Several historians believe he succeeded Piye when his brother could not keep the seat, while others claim that he ascended to the throne after the pharaoh Shabitku, who was thought to be either his son or Piye's son. Recent archaeological findings have contested Shabaka's succession of the throne from Piye, stating that there are several pieces of evidence that Shabitku came first. The fact that Shabitku's tomb resembles Piye's, while Shabaka's tomb more closely resembles Taharka's tomb, formally supports this claim. While Piye and Shabitku's pyramids are open-cut structures with corbelled roofs, Shabaka and the other succeeding pharaohs have fully tunneled burial chambers. It's unclear who came first, but Shabaka, Pa's brother, is likely to have ruled before Shabitku. He secured the religious sector's support by reviving the high priest of Amun and installing his son Amenemhat in that position during his time. Meanwhile, his sister, Amenemhat I, was considered Amun's wife and held tremendous spiritual power in the nation. Amenemhat is known from a statue found in Karnak. Shabaka's reign in Egypt was considered the golden age of Nubian domination. He gained more control over the southern kingdoms and successfully suppressed every attempted revolt. People credit him with imposing control over the Nubian Empire, which included Egypt. Pa conquered and left the lower princes to rule their kingdoms with little control from the Kush. Shabaka exercised more control and suppressed any revolts under his rule. His reign reached the Egyptian land from Nubia down to the Delta region. He was also able to defend the land from foreign conquests, precisely that of the Neo-Assyrian Empire under Sargon II. Like Pa, Shabaka invested in reviving the ancient Egyptian religion and commissioned numerous architectural works throughout Egypt. Thebes, his seat of power, mostly displays traces of his favored architectural structures. He is also famous for erecting a pink granite statue of himself, wearing the twin crowns of Egypt to show his superiority in all of the land and symbolize his rule over ancient Egypt's upper and lower regions. The lavish nature of his relics has earned widespread recognition. Recently, scholars have discovered many of these relics and are currently using them for academic purposes. The Shabaka stone, one of his most renowned relics, preserves the Old Kingdom documents that the king ordered. The king used the stone to chronicle period events, demonstrating his fascination with ancient Egyptian culture. These notes benefited modern scholars who wanted to learn more about the Old Kingdom. He is also known for the Shabaka Gate, a stone door found by archaeologists in 2011. This massive stone gate was believed to guard the king's treasures, theoretically including valuable scrolls of the ancient Egyptians and ancient Kushite culture. Shabaka's reign was seen as a period during which Egyptian culture could thrive. Shabaka's rule revived the culture of chronicling and the creation of artifacts similar to those of the olden days. Shabaka's reign was said to have ended during his 15th regnal year. He was buried in a pyramid located at El Kuru. Taharka the Powerful. Taharka, also known as Tirhaka, Taharka, or Taharko, was an ancient Egyptian king of the 25th dynasty. He was a cousin of the pharaoh Shabitku and a son of Pa. Along with his kin, he hailed from the Kushite kingdom in Nubia and succeeded to the throne as the fourth of the Black Pharaohs. He reportedly reigned over Egypt from 690 BC to about 664 BC, roughly 26 years in total. Taharka's reign was considered the most prosperous of all the 25th dynasty. Like his successors, he controlled the land and its population while preventing internal unrest. He and the rest of his kin entered Egypt after being summoned by the then-king, Shabitku, to protect the land from foreign invasion. From this, Taharka had proved to be a great army leader, having successfully defended the land. An inscription in Kawa IV reportedly revealed the king's preference for him. Other depictions of Taharka's youth include his memory of seeing the poor state of the temple of Amun at Kawa and a reference to the high Nile flood in the 6th year of Taharka and his coronation. However, due to its non-chronological writing, it is difficult to decode Kawa V, the chronicle of the king's youth. Many historians categorized Taharka's rise to the throne as irregular, as scriptures detailing his accession are still vague. Scholars explicitly noted that Taharka succeeded his predecessor after his death, assuming the crown from his cousin Shabitku. The omission of Shabaka's reign suggests a potential power struggle between Taharka and his uncle. Historians identify it as a possibility of Taharka acquiring the throne by ousting Shabaka from power. Taharka's rule included several conflicts with the Assyrians, who repeatedly tried to invade the fertile Nile basin. Despite the many battles and raids, his reign also saw the rise of a very affluent period in Egypt and Kush. Taharka was a powerful ally of the Palestinians during their resistance against King Sennacherib of Assyria at etched. He was only 20 years old during the historic battle that enabled them to stall the Assyrians' advances toward Jerusalem. According to the Hebrew Bible's account, the siege resulted in the loss of more than 100,000 soldiers. Taharka's military force established itself in etched, affording Egypt a period of peace. As the peace settled in the Egyptian Empire, Taharka saw the kingdom flourish. His 6th year as king was exceedingly abundant, with enough rainfall and a massive harvest. He used this time of peace to revive architecture and build new temples throughout the empire. He put up the largest pyramid in Napata and added temples at Karnak, Kawa, and Jebel Barkal. His contributions to architecture included the sacred lake structures at Karnak, the kiosks in the first court, and the temple's colonnades. Taharka's crown, depicted in ancient hieroglyphics and statues, shows 2 snakes, which are said to represent his reign as both the king of Egypt and the Kushite Empire. He ruled Egypt from his seat in Memphis. The Greek historian Strabo also described Taharka as having reached Europe with Megasthenes and Spain's mention. This could only mean that Pharaoh's military conquest might have reached the Mediterranean, or that stories of him might have reached other lands. He was also considered the savior and hero of the Hebrew people for preventing the Assyrians from reaching Jerusalem in his early years. He had built an alliance with the Semitic people in the Levant southwest, which gave him a foothold in the Near East. Taharka was defeated by the Assyrian king Esarhaddon around 671 BC, when the latter besieged the empire's capital, Memphis. After this defeat, Esarhaddon drove Taharka to Upper Egypt, and 2 years later he returned to conquer the Assyrian-infested Lower Egypt. Before Ashurbanipal, Esarhaddon's successor completely drove him out of Egypt. He briefly regained control over the delta. Taharka died in Nubia around 664 BC, when the city of Thebes fell into the Assyrians' hands. He was buried at Nuri in North Sudan. He was the first pharaoh buried in the pyramids near Nuri. Tantamani and the fall of the 25th ancient Egyptian dynasty. Considered the last of the black pharaohs of the 25th dynasty, Tantamani, also spelled Tanutamin, Tonwetamani, or Tementhes, was a Kushite king who ruled as a pharaoh and king of the Kushite kingdom. Tantamani was said to have been a son of Shabaka and the successor of Taharka. He ascended the throne when Taharka retreated to Nubia and died there. Egypt was under Taharka's reign when the Assyrian Empire finally gained footing within the region and made enormous strides to complete its invasion. Esarhaddon waited for an opportunity to attack the then peaceful kingdom around 677 BC, aiming to pacify Arab tribes near the Dead Sea. He penetrated the region, reaching up to the Brook of Egypt. Esarhaddon's death deterred the Assyrians' return, but his successor, Ashurbanipal, later continued the invasion by seizing Memphis and plundering Thebes. When the Assyrians captured Memphis, Taharka managed to escape, but they took his brother and son as prisoners. During their invasion, the Assyrians appointed local princes governors of the different regions, one of whom was Necho I. When the Assyrians left, Tantamani gathered an army ready to reclaim Egypt and appointed Necho I a puppet king. Despite successfully assassinating Necho, the Nubian army ultimately faced defeat. Having heard of Tantamani's attempt to reconquer Egypt, the Assyrians returned and looted Thebes' city. His control over Upper Egypt was still recognized until 656 BC, when Psamtik I took control of Thebes. Tantamani later retreated to Napata in Nubia, where he ruled the kingdom of Kush alone. The kingdom continued to thrive for years, but could not regain Egypt again. The Kushite princess. The kingdom of Kush made room for women to take high posts in society, often a practice deeply rooted in religion. The pharaohs often appointed women to high religious positions, giving them some power over the kingdom's religious affairs. Amenemhat I, who was the daughter of Kashta and the sister of Pie and Shabaka, was appointed the title Amun's wife and divine adoratrix, which afforded her political and economic power. Later, she used her position to her advantage in the invasion of the Kushite Empire. As the god Amun's wife, she was considered a divine being, and her vast influence enabled her to appoint her kin to power. As ancient African culture allowed women to hold high political positions, Amenemhat had tremendous power and wealth. She influenced the political activities of the 25th dynasty. Her job included working in the temples, but she was also influential as an advisor to all the Kushite kings who ruled the land. Contributions of the Kushite kings. While the Assyrians' invasion marked an end to the Kushite power over Egypt, the Kushite kings' contributions to the ancient Egyptian culture are considered advantageous to the Egyptian culture. While in most cases foreign invasion meant the degradation of native belief and culture, the Kushite dynasty worked to preserve and, in some cases, revive long-forgotten Egyptian practices. They built temples and architecture that preserved Egyptian art and favored artisans who studied the Old Kingdom's artwork. The restoration of these artifacts gave modern scholars a better glimpse of the ancient civilization. The Kushite invasion may have been considered a blessing for the Egyptian populace. The 25th dynasty gave absolute stability to the chaotic, sectorized government, far from when the Nubians first came. From temples to statues to bringing back the use of pyramids to entomb royalty, the Kushite kings encouraged the ancient Egyptian culture to thrive. Their rule saw the construction of a series of pyramids along the Nile Valley. Life during the Kushite dynasty may have had several periods of conflict, but like their homeland capital of Napata, the Kush kings established huge metropolises that enticed commerce, bringing trade and money to the cities of the 25th dynasty. The 26th dynasty. With 25 dynasties behind us, we embark on a new chapter in the history of one of the world's greatest ancient civilizations and its transformation. From the unification and reunification of the upper and lower regions to later events, we have covered substantial ground already. Nevertheless, here we are again, more advanced in the timeline and just a few leaps away from the end of one of the ancient world's penultimate civilizations. So far, we have waded through countless upheavals, political riots, famine, and royal conquests, and we ask that you go through the journey with us again to explore a bygone era in Egypt's rich narrative, the 26th dynasty. What exactly happened in the Senate 26th dynasty? This book explores all of the ups and downs of this era, so settle in and allow us to take you back to a time and place shrouded by mystery and magic. Feel the warm sands of Egypt beneath your feet. Listen to the lapping sound of water from the Nile echo in your ears. Appreciate the bustle of the city center behind you. There is a quiet shuffling, and a new order is turning the wheels of Egypt's ways again. What is abound, and why is the air electrified with excitement? It is 664 BCE, and the Nubian pharaohs have finally been expelled from power. As onlookers, we enter the 26th dynasty of Egypt with fascination and curiosity. Nevertheless, unlike the turn of the previous dynasties, there is no outward kerfuffle for the throne. The transition from the 25th dynasty to the 26th had been quite yet calculated. One of the appointed native governors of the previous regime had set their eyes on the throne and successfully attempted to ascend into greater power. This was how this prosperous age in Egypt's history started. During this time, temples were built, and respect for written contracts flourished. Despite its interspersion of strife and chaos, the 26th dynasty of Egypt represents a significant relief from the previous period of disorder and furor. For a moment, Egypt and its people could breathe in peace and some grandeur. Of course, unbeknownst to them, the throne would soon fall to the hands of the last leader, and ancient Egypt as a civilization would cease. However, let us not stray too far from the end of the timeline. For now, it is the 26th dynasty, and we are here to recount the events that made up this arresting and fateful time. A brief introduction to the 26th dynasty. One of the first things that define the 26th dynasty is that it ghosts the end of the last native dynasty, right before the Persian acquisition and the late period's beginnings. This slow decline and eventual fall to Persian neighbors' grasp began in the 24th dynasty and ended with the last of the 26th dynasty's rulers, Psammeticus III, in chains on a journey to Susa. We have Psammeticus I as one of the main characters to recall for this stirring turn of events. As the descendant of the line of Bakan-Ranef, this pharaoh was able to bask in the glory and wealth as the sole ruler of the throne of ancient Egypt. In what some may consider an erroneous decision and a lack of foresight, he decided to sever ties with Assyrians, who had at this time been preoccupied with civil unrest and war. Instead, Psammeticus sought to ally with the king of Lydia, Gyges. Together, the two leaders rallied back and forth between nations to push back attacks from the understandably incensed Assyrians. This tactic proved effective until Psammeticus began setting his eyes on an even bigger trophy. With the east of Egypt left in confusion after the devastating effects of battle, Psammeticus attempted to assert the throne's power in these regions. However, an equally enterprising and far more influential Babylonian king named Nebuchadnezzar II had already staked their claims in these regions. In retaliation to Psammeticus and his successors' attempts to overthrow his people, this Babylonian king doubled his efforts to drive back the Egyptians and conquer Egypt for himself too. He was successful in the former, but Egypt remained in the firm grasp of the Senate pharaohs. This continuous war of power and influence marred the 26th dynasty, but it did not wholly cloud its people's raw enthusiasm to improve their architectural projects and scholarly pursuits. Although evidence for the former is scarce because of its economic center's environmental conditions, much has been transcribed and accounts have been preserved regarding the 26th dynasty. This is a 130-year dynasty, and the ancient Egyptians enjoyed more than a century of security under a healthy ruling family. This dynasty's whole theme was simple: to survive and revive the old grandeur that had so clearly defined the nation. External strife and expansion during this period had been foregone in favor of stability. In the next chapters, we will explore the events that ushered in this remarkable era and what can be considered ancient Egyptians' lives during this revival period of the nation's history. The birth of the 26th dynasty. To fully understand the weight of the events that transpired in the 26th dynasty, we must first know what unraveled in the 25th dynasty. This chapter allows us a moment to trace the stepping stones that have led us to this period. In the previous periods, ancient scholars and military records have transcribed a shadow period of struggle with the Assyrian army and their threat of advancing towards Egypt's center. By tactical prowess and its execution, the Egyptian throne could finally push back the Assyrians and drive them away. As a result, in the year 664 BCE, Egypt fell into the hands of the Pharaoh's Senate. Psammeticus III was the first ruler, but several believe Necho I was the first 26th dynasty pharaoh. This marked the beginning of the 26th dynasty and more than a decade of rule under a robust governance unit from a line of Senate pharaohs. Life in the 26th dynasty. In this chapter, we aim to depict a culture that has successfully overcome the influence of the Assyrian culture. In the stead of chaos and conflict in the years leading to the 26th dynasty, the 130 years of rule under the Senate Pharaohs had been considered a revival of the Egyptian throne's previously lost grandeur. For the past dynasties, rulers were bent on expanding Egypt's territory and securing global acclaim for the nation's power. The Senate rulers set all of this aside. Instead, they have decided to take a more conservative, albeit beneficial, route. They decided to focus their efforts on rebuilding the lost splendor and glory of their civilization. Survival became the central theme of the 26th dynasty. The rulers did not waste resources on military conquest. Instead, they focused on ensuring the ancient traditions continued with their legacy. As an effect of this simple preservation of an entire civilization, the rich traditions accumulated over the years partnered with a renewed appreciation for becoming the bedrock of a revival of artistic expression. Thus, the culture of ancient Egypt thrived during this period. Regarding government reforms, the Senate rulers aimed to establish Egypt as a newly independent state. However, for this pursuit to succeed, the throne had to invite foreign mercenaries into Egyptian soldiers' ranks. Egypt had become a hodgepodge of culture and expression, with these foreigners in Memphis and Greek settlers in other delta areas. Nevertheless, amidst the bustle of outside influences, the Egyptians remained steadfast in their traditions. Of course, cultural influences from these foreign cultures still managed to get past this fortified gate of nationalistic reverence. On the other hand, economic concerns became more focused on simply providing for every household sustenance. After all, the Assyrians' retreat also spelled the withdrawal of support for their vassal countries. Thus, much like its people, Egypt staggered back onto its feet in the 26th dynasty. The nation and all of its constituents had finally regained their autonomy. For a nation under foreign rule, this had been a time of equal parts excitement and indeterminate possibilities. Survival and revival were the essence of the 26th dynasty. The atmosphere was consistently filled with creativity, self-preservation, and practicality during more than a century of Senate rule. The citizens and the government mirrored each other in various pursuits, thus successfully cementing the 26th dynasty as Egypt's rest and recovery period. The 7 pharaohs of the 26th dynasty. By now, it is clear to all scholars and enthusiasts of ancient Egyptian civilization that most recorded family trees are complex and can never be validated. We will still strive to incorporate as many facts regarding each Senate ruler's lineage and contribution to the 26th dynasty as possible. For this to happen, we must get to know the pharaohs who ruled at this time. Necho-Jedna. The first local site king is named Necho I. Many know him by his Egyptian name, Mentuhotep. He first started as a governing ruler of Sais, appointed by Esarhaddon, the Neo-Assyrian Empire king. He remained one of the king's vassals, successfully expanding Esarhaddon's territories. Despite his role as a conspirator against a new Assyrian king, Esarhaddon's death, and Necho's unexpected pardon, Necho I continued to amass territories and expand his influence over Egypt. By around 671 BCE, right after the Second Assyrian invasion, Necho I began his role as the governor of Egypt's entire western delta. Simultaneously, they recognized his son Psammeticus as the mayor of Athribis. Those presumably generously rewarded Necho I's family for their loyalty. During his time as a governor or vassal over most of Egypt's territories, Necho I was able to keep Egyptian culture afloat as much as he could. Certain Assyrian documents and Egyptian art bear his reign's attribution. He didn't accomplish much but clearly took advantage of the time. Red is the first pharaoh of the 26th dynasty, and there is no doubt about his contribution to the infiltration of Senate influence over Egypt. To secure favorable awards for himself and his successors, he made sure to solidify his relationship with the Assyrian royalty. Necho I died during a battle just outside of Memphis. He had been defending his territories against the Kushite army led by Tantamani, successor of Taharqa. Eventually, without a leader, he secured the western delta of the Nile. Following his father's appointment, Psammeticus assumed the role of chief, surpassing his vassal status. Egypt was to be reunited again under his term, and he would gain control over the now wild land. Psammeticus I. Also spelled as Psamtik I, the second pharaoh of the 26th dynasty was Necho I's son. After his father died, he served as the mayor of Athribis and eventually as the chief of the vassals for all of the Assyrian territories in Egypt. In his 9th regnal year, he had succeeded in a presumably impossible feat, reunifying Egypt. All of this started when he sent out a naval fleet to Thebes to ask the wife of Amun to adopt his daughter Nitocris I. This was carried out in a ceremony known as an adoption stela. Successful in this pursuit, Psammeticus I had knowingly, or unknowingly, expelled the last vestiges of Nubian control in Egypt. With Thebes finally accepting his authority, Psammeticus I had ultimately been able to infiltrate one of Egypt's most influential regions. He began to promptly campaign for a reunification of the country, creating discord and striking counter-campaigns against local chiefs against this ideal. Over time, the enterprising and charismatic pharaoh restored Egypt's independence and wealth. Psammeticus I served 54 years on the throne. He allegedly commissioned the creation of a colossal statue, the biggest in the late period. Through tactical genius and slow infiltration of power over the land, Psammeticus successfully brought back the independence that most Egyptians had been seeking in the last hundreds of years. He had installed military garrisons, organized foreign mercenary corps, and stayed in the good graces of the wealthy nobles, all for a higher cause. He envisioned fully reviving Egypt's customs, religion, and art during the Old Kingdom. Once he achieved peace and settled everything, he could solidify his ideals and ultimately promote independence for his people. When he turned over the throne to his son, the Kingdom of Egypt enjoyed new independence and prosperity that it had been unable to enjoy for a long time. He died in 610 BCE, and the nation was grateful for his valor and deeds. Necho II, the pharaoh of a newly independent nation, had to navigate the ups and downs of this transition. Despite his best efforts, he still faced the misfortune of being viewed as a failure compared to his father. Let's delve deeper into his life in this subchapter. Necho II took the throne immediately after his father, Psammeticus I, succeeded in reunifying Egypt. In addition to assisting the nation's consciousness to move toward independence, he was also in charge of cleaning up the frayed edges of foreign revolts and attempts to regain control over Egypt. Right after his coronation, he had to take care of raids by both the Scythians and the Cimmerians. While leading multiple military campaigns, Necho VI's first trial by fire helped the Assyrians in war. The Bible even chronicles this feat in the second book of Kings. The book stated that Necho II had attempted to block his army at Megiddo and had fatally paid for it. He also took the Judean ruler, Jehoahaz, as a prisoner. Much like his father, Necho II tended to hire Grecian mercenaries. He had recruited several Ionian Greeks to do his bidding, especially for naval affairs. At that time, Egyptians were not too pleased with his decision to organize an Egyptian navy because of their predisposition against the sea and its dangers. The attempt to build a naval stronghold was less successful than his other military projects. One of N's most notable feats regarding the expeditions he had ordered was completing the Cape route. This was the first noted completion of such a route, with the expedition circumnavigating Africa for 3 years. Necho II eventually died in 595 BCE. His son, Psamtik II or Psammeticus II, succeeded him on the throne. For some reason, however, his successor had utterly erased all traces of Necho II's reign. Whether this had been done maliciously or merely as a result of natural damages, scholars of Egyptology have yet to agree on a theory. Psammeticus II. At around 595 BCE, Egypt was again introduced to a new ruler. Psammeticus II, or Psamtik II, succeeded his father, Necho II, on the Egyptian throne. He had successfully led many military campaigns during his time and had become the victor in multiple battles, mostly against the Nubians. In the third year of his reign, he arranged for a raid on Nubia, which caused sizable devastation to Kush's kingdom. It is presumed that Psammeticus II's motivation for such a raid was to stomp on any possibility of a foreign uprising and any attempt to reconquer Egypt. As history would tell you, he had been successful in his attempt. Under his reign, the entire Kush army had been completely vanquished, and any plans of recapturing Egypt for their gain had been promptly shut down. Psammeticus II's initiative eventually caused the Nubian Empire to retreat further in the regions of Meroe. He also made advances towards the Kingdom of Judah, all in the pursuit of recementing Egypt's power and taking back the nation's lost territories. Despite his brief stint on the throne for 6 years, Psammeticus II initiated several temples and architectural projects. One of the significant projects built during his time was the temple in Site. The Persians and Romans noted that the architects modeled these buildings out of granite and turquoise. The Temple of Heliopolis also boasted 2 obelisks. Let us not forget the temple at Hibis as well. He had built a temple house in El Karga Oasis in honor of the gods Amun, Khonsu, and Mut. The Grand Temple endured until 1830 to build an aluminum factory. Despite what is considered a desecration of this temple, it remains one of the late period's primary temples, and Egyptologists have strived to restore it to its previous splendor. With his military campaign successes and his prolific initiation of architectural projects, Psammeticus II was an effective leader. He restored Egypt's respectability and regained the nation's trust in the throne. Psammeticus II died in 589 BCE. Egypt had mourned for its legendary leader and was optimistic about the rise of a new one, his son named Ares. After Psammeticus II, the king was his son, Apries, who ruled from 589 BCE to 570 BCE. By today's standards, his reign lasted up to 19 years. He also goes by Hofra, as mentioned in the Bible in Jeremiah 44:30. Much like his father, Apries busied himself with Judean policies and affairs. He also initiated multiple constructions of buildings and temples, specially erected in Egypt's major cities at the time. Nevertheless, despite all the outward success, this young king's reign was not without an internal struggle. Another recorded failure for the king was to save Jerusalem from the Babylonians' advancing forces. The fleet that he had sent to protect the territory had been unsuccessful in doing so. As a result, Jerusalem fell into the Babylonians' hands in a well-recorded time of 18 months. For his part, the only assistance the king could provide was to welcome the immigrants as they fled their city. A more severe issue arose during Apries' attempt to protect Libya from the Greek invaders. The Grecian forces defeated the army he sent into the region, fueling internal strife between native Egyptians and foreign mercenaries in the Apries army. Amasis II, Apries' general, quickly rose in popularity as he rallied all of the unhappy Egyptians. He had their support as he declared himself pharaoh in around 570 BCE. Apries, for his part, fled at this mutiny. It would not take long for Apries to march back to Egypt and attempt to regain the throne. However, Amasis II had anticipated this and quickly met the former in a battle. According to one account, Amasis II emerged victorious while Apries met his demise on the battlefield. According to Herodotus, however, Amasis II had been more forthcoming with the previous pharaoh and had welcomed him back to Egypt. However, Herodotus reports that the Egyptian people insisted on punishing Apries and strangling him to death. Whatever account may have been valid, one thing is exact. Apries died. Amasis II had then been able to cement his claim to the throne. To pay respect to a former pharaoh in Egypt, Amasis II observed the proper funerary rites that befit a deceased royal. This may have also stemmed from the fact that the past king had been his father-in-law. Some accounts claim that Amasis II had married Apries' daughter after all. Amasis II. Let us delve deeper into who the once general and eventually turned pharaoh of Egypt had been. Amasis II was born to a typical family in the city of Sais. However, his tenacity and quick wit in battle led him to quickly rise in the ranks of the Apries army. His military campaigns as a general during the Nubian conquests accounted for one of his key successes. His performance on the battlefield had earned him the respect of his comrades and his superiors' trust. He quickly took advantage of the staged coup d'état against Apries and declared himself the new pharaoh of Egypt. Some historians have marked this time as the last powerful ruler before Persian rule under his reign. He remained influential even up to the end of the Age of Dynasties. The 30th dynasty applied some of his military decisions and policies, but did not yield the desired results. Since most of what we know about Amasis II comes from Herodotus's accounts, here is another anecdote that the scribe included in his works. Cambyses of Persia had summoned an ophthalmologist from Egypt to his court. Despite the straightforward nature of the inquiry, Amasis II took a more aggressive approach by compelling a local doctor to flee his family and country and relocate to Persia. Naturally, this forced exile did not sit well with the doctor, who began plotting revenge. Over a few months, or possibly years, he had gained Cambyses II's favor and acted as his advisor on many occasions. One of his pieces of advice was simple, but could swiftly dismantle Amasis II and the Egyptian Empire. Ask for Amasis II's daughter's hand in marriage. Thus, the Persian king did as he was advised, and Amasis II sent in Apries' daughter, who was also said to have been his wife on some accounts, as a deceptive move. Naturally, Apries' daughter Nitetis betrayed Amasis and told the Persian king of Amasis II's trickery. Insulted, Cambyses sent his army to kill Amasis, but he had been too late. The Egyptian king had already died before Cambyses could exact his revenge. The brunt of the old pharaoh's treachery had fallen wholly on the shoulders of his son and successor, Psammetichus III. These circumstances indirectly brought about the interests of the Persian conquests in Egypt. The general turned pharaoh died in 526 BCE. Like most of the kings before him, he had been buried in the necropolis of Sais. Archaeologists have yet to dig his tomb and discover more about this once great leader of the ancient world. He had a reputation as an unconventional king, perhaps owing to the circumstances of his early life. Nevertheless, we cannot deny that this king was able to rally most of Egypt during a crucial time. He diverted the possibility of unrest and nurtured a space for cultural affairs to flourish. His smart, trickster ways helped him become Egypt's greatest man, but also doomed him and his nation in the future. Psammetichus III. Now we finally reach the last of the legendary pharaohs of the 26th dynasty. Egypt thrived in the 130 years of the Scythe pharaoh's rule, despite all the foreign attempts to infiltrate the recently unified nation. The last king of the dynasty fell at the hands of the unfortunate Psammetichus III. He had been Amasis II's son, the trickster king, and had inherited a nation on the brink of demise. As a result of his father's actions, the young king had to take on the role of driving away the Persian forces sent by his father's enemy, Cambyses. To learn more about Psammetichus III, we still rely on Herodotus's works to clarify his life and achievements. According to the same scribe, the young king had only managed to stay like a king for a brief period of 6 months. He had spent all 6 months preparing for battle and confronting the fast-advancing Persian army sent by Cambyses. Despite his utmost efforts, he could not repel the army, leading to his capture and subsequent return to Susa in chains. He reportedly committed suicide in Susa, anticipating a more agonizing death. Some could argue that the reign that followed his coronation in Thebes had foretold his death. This had served as a bad omen for the Egyptians. The young king still lacked the experience and military know-how to successfully defend his people and nation. He, along with his family and his noblemen, had been carried off to Susa in chains. According to accounts, his friends, one older adult in particular, had been stripped of their title and nobility and reduced to begging in the streets of the foreign land. This, along with the death sentences for his loved ones, broke the young king's spirit. His passion for his friends and his family had managed to capture Cambyses' interest, and he was brought down to the level of the Persian king's palace staff. Despite this show of sympathy from the Persian king, Cambyses could still not brush off his son's death and the humiliation of his allies. He arranged for a rebellion among the captured Egyptians, but Cambyses quickly learned of this fact. In return, Psammetichus III committed suicide by drinking bull's blood. The 26th dynasty ended with the tragic death of the young and unfortunate king. By this time, the fate of the Egyptian kingdom was unsure. What might become of this proud and rich ancient civilization without a pharaoh to lead it? We will soon find out by recounting the events of the 27th dynasty in our next work. The end of the 26th dynasty. The 26th dynasty ended in the most tragic of ways. Despite all the Sate king's efforts to maintain peace and hope for prosperity in the land, a string of disastrous decisions by the trickster king, Amenemhat, undid almost a century of hard work from the previous pharaohs. Still, without focusing so much on its ending, there has been much to learn about some of the late period's greatest leadership shows. The early pharaohs managed to protect their people while still fighting off foreign invaders and maintaining diplomacy throughout. Despite not starting from the best circumstances, they raised the proud nation of Egypt from its foundation. Juggling to make the most of their sudden freedom from foreign rule, the 26th dynasty rulers led the people to rediscover independence and allowed them to thrive within their capacity. Still, the demise of the last king of the 26th dynasty had been tragic. With him, the still infant stages of Egyptian independence quickly vanished. Once again, Egypt became an open territory, allowing all interested foreign invaders to infiltrate without restriction. Tian's new overlords, the Persians. The Persian king had no plans of assimilating into Egyptian life and did not want to be an Egyptian, unlike their previous captors, the Libyans and the Nubians. This meant that Egypt's way of life, cultural heritage, and wealth were at risk being overshadowed by Persian customs and traditions, borders in its long history, and all the previous strings of dynasties. What else was in the books of Egypt past the 26th dynasty? Read about the 27th dynasty to find out. We'll meet at its foundation.